Mana System, Hello, World. By M.J. Markgrove. Chapter 131, A Meeting Long Overdue. The trip from the Orc Forest to the town where I met Fiona took only 3 hours. I was curious about the state of the town, so we flew over, remaining invisible. The barracks were easily recognizable and still stood. It seemed fewer people manned the walls, but perhaps they were just out on patrol. I did spot a few patrols, but I was surprised to see some of them were civilian patrols. No wall had been erected, so the Sulit and other creatures were still about, as I had spotted a few groups of those. There were some makeshift walls, set up to block off streets, but it appeared that the locals and the Royal Guard had not joined forces. From the air, it was easy to see the mark of delineation, separating the north half of the town where the old citizens lived, and the south end where the barracks resided. Martin saw this too and chimed in. "Are these people dumb? Why haven't they come together? There is no way they can survive like this forever." I shrugged. There were a lot of older people in this town, stubborn and prideful. Geez, still. Well, maybe you can work your charm and bring the two sides together to bargain. Martin gave me a sidelong glance before sighing. Maybe, we'll see what I can do. I smiled. I didn't care if these people wanted to stay separate, but I was finally seeing a need for strong forces to come together, even if it just slowed evil groups like the Black Dragon or the Sons of Autumn. As long as I wasn't the one negotiating to make it happen, that was. I really wanted to unleash the mana cannons on the Sulid patrols, but I didn't want to give us away just yet. I was also tempted to drop Ska down to deal with them, but figured with the locals' current separation that was unwise. Perhaps after Martin started his peace talks. I looked over at Fiona and noticed she looked nervous. "You okay?" "Hey, oh, yeah, just not sure what I'm going to say to the commander." "Say whatever you want, know that we got your back." She nodded slightly, still staring at the barracks in the remote viewer. I should be the one worried, but I wasn't. The Sulid we spotted didn't seem much stronger than the last time we were here, not that I could tell much from a glance. But if that was the case, it was unlikely the commander had managed to get to level 20 yet. We would know more once we approached the town on foot. I circled the fortress back to the south and found an old truck stop that was mostly intact. It was perfect because there was an old dirt pile behind it that made the stone of the fortress stand out less when viewed from afar. The fortress touched down, cracking the old and worn blacktop as it settled on the landing struts. I angled the door toward the dirt hill, making it much harder to spot. I would be engaging the defenses this time around, but they wouldn't last forever. We had a month at most before the gems ran out of power. I hoped to be gone by then, but you never knew. If I needed to, I could come back and recharge the gems. It was only a dozen miles or so. Grab everything you need, we may not be back for a few weeks. Ska, if you want to stick with the group, that's fine, otherwise you can go hunting. Just avoid the other humans if you do. I think some might be a bit jumpy, having to deal with monsters on a daily basis. Ska rumbled in assent. I will go hunt, but I will catch up with you before you reach the barracks. Martin and I gave him a fist bump before he disappeared out the door. We still weren't ready, so he would be long gone by the time we got outside. Ska raced through the sparse tree cover and ducked behind buildings as he followed the scents only his sharp nose could pick up. Paul had pointed out the frogmen to Ska, and he was eager to test their mettle in combat. It wasn't hard for him to pick up their scent. They smelled like rotting vegetation, mixed with dead fish. The thought of fish made his stomach rumble, and he realized he hadn't eaten since this morning. He growled quietly, admonishing himself as he should have grabbed some food from the kitchen before leaving the fortress. He would have to hunt something down on the way. He stopped behind a building, overrun with trees and brush. A strong waft of the Sulid hit him, and he stuck his head out to look around the building. He spotted 3 of the creatures, quietly poking at something a few houses down. Ska's lips rippled happily as he readied himself. He burst from his cover on all fours, racing toward the 3 as fast as his body would take him. He had covered half the distance before one of the creatures finally noticed him and let out a croak of alarm. The other 2 were still scrabbling to stand when Ska used leap to cover the remaining distance. They tried to stab at him with their cruel spears, but they were slow and uncoordinated. The first one had its head smashed in by a swipe of Ska's powerful hand. He didn't even need to extend his claws as the creature hit the ground hard. Ska used redirect to change course and get the one that was now behind him, surprising the creature as it tried to backpedal and skewer Ska with its spear. The spear did rake a line across his chest, but the gauntlet activated, preventing the blow from causing any damage. Ska swiped down at the creature's face, raking bloody furrows and taking out an eye. The creature squealed in pain as it tried to jump away. The motion only made Ska's need for the chase grow as he easily caught up to the prey. A debilitating strike tore out the creature's spine and ended its life. Ska wheeled and looked for the last one, finding it hopping away like mad. He growled in satisfaction as he gave chase. Martin, Frotsar, and I made our way on foot to the city. Fiona was with us, but she was conserving her limited time for her human form. The reason we didn't use mounts was to not spook the locals and to get a lay of the land. We weren't even hiding behind Frotsar's illusion magic. I had also chosen to use Obfuscate to erase my second class altogether and lower my max level to 18. It more closely matched up to my fellow travelers, and thinking on it, nobody was going to believe I had taken a second class as a Tempus mech when I never used a sword. Hell, I still had Randy's sword tucked away in my ring. I planned to give it to Fiona after today. A gift to signify the completion of my quest. We encountered a few roving bands of Sulid. But they hadn't reached level 13 yet, making them easy to dispatch. Some tried to run or hop away, but they were cut down with ranged attacks. Arcane Bolt and Earth Fist were great for this. We even encountered a small group of level 5 goblins. I was merciless in slaughtering them, still a little angry over the loss of my beloved sweatshirt. I made a note to scour the area later. Where you found one goblin, there were usually more. After the encounter with the goblins, we didn't run into any more monsters and Ska joined back up with us. We did, however, come across a Royal Guard patrol. Could they even be called Royal Guards anymore? I decided to leave the semantics up to someone else as Frotsar hailed the group of 4 soldiers. Greetings, guardsmen. To whom am I addressing? The guards looked confused before one responded. Are you from the kingdom? Indeed I am, perhaps you remember me from last season, Frotsar, merchant extraordinaire. The guards whispered amongst themselves, while not taking their eyes off of the 5 of us as Fiona was in her physical form. I was surprised they didn't recognize her, then again she hardly resembled her spit-shined uptight self of less than a year ago. Yet, we remember you, one of the men finally responded. Who are the people with you? The soldiers didn't look afraid, only wary. Good friends and travel companions. Uh-huh. And what brings you back to this out-of-the-way city? Why trade, my good fellow? As well as an assignment for my friends behind me. That seemed to add a bit of light to their tired eyes. Oh yeah, an assignment from who? I decided to speak up, Lord Durbin of the Asheran Kingdom. The details are for your commander though. The 4 deliberated amongst themselves for a bit more before deciding on a course of action. They were more subdued than I remembered them from my last encounter. It seems the months alone in an out-of-the-way fort, essentially, took some of the spit and polish off of them as well. Very well, but keep your weapons stored. And refrain from using any magic. We complied with the reasonable demand, not that I wouldn't open a can of hoop ass if it came down to it. We followed behind the group as they led us to the barracks. It was only a mile or so and we didn't encounter any more monsters. We did pick up another patrol group that followed from the rear, sandwiching us between them. I wasn't too worried as a quick glance showed that their levels were between 14 and 16. It was a good thing I had lowered my visible level. I don't think they would have been as casual about leading 4 higher-leveled people into the barracks otherwise. But they had the number advantage, so it made them less nervous. The barracks finally came into sight, looking a little more worn down than the last time I had been here. It looks like they had suffered more than one attack on their walls. But the sturdy stone and thick wood doors held firm. A horn sounded as we approached, alerting the guards within to open the gate. It seemed like there were more faces than the last time I had been here. I looked for the slaves I had sent up this way but didn't spot any familiar faces amongst the currently assembled men. I did spot the commander, heading our way. Well, this ought to be interesting. Frotsar. I hadn't expected you back this soon, and you brought guests, the commander said, his eyes roving over us before they froze on me, then flicked back to Fiona, who seemed to shrink at his penetrating gaze. I see we have a few things to discuss. Frotsar, how about you set up your stall and see if you have anything my men would like to purchase? Afterward, we can discuss your remaining wares. I could tell by the commander's tone this wasn't a suggestion for Frotsar, but an order. I rolled my eyes, earing a glare and a frown from the commander. Follow me, we appear to have a lot to discuss. Ska, how about you keep Frotsar company? Ska nodded, happy to not sit through a boring meeting. We entered what looked like a small conference room. The table in the center was old and looked like it fit with the style, but the modern-looking leather chairs did not. Please, sit. The three of us sat, followed by the commander, his armor clanking against the side of the chair. I'll be perfectly honest, I didn't expect this meeting to go this smoothly. So, you actually returned, gotta admit, I had assumed you were dead or had run off with the money. But looking at my lost soldier, I see we have a story here. Spectral companion. I slapped myself mentally. Of course, he would identify her. Not like she could hide her class. Fiona let out a sigh before telling her story. So let me get this straight, you died, then were revived as a ghost, only attached to this man. The commander gestured towards me. Pretty much, Fiona replied. And what of these black dragons? That was the group that nasty mage belonged to, correct? She is dead, along with the entire leadership and most of their members. The rest have been scattered and shouldn't pose any more threat than usual bandits, I replied, cutting in. So why bother returning here? Your mission was a failure. 2 reasons. First, you deserved to know what happened to one of your soldiers, and the second was because Lord Durbin gave us an assignment. The man grunted before snapping his fingers at me and holding out his hand. Let's see what that snake wants. I handed over the sealed document and the commander produced a knife and deftly sliced the seal open. His eyes scanned over the document quickly before he tossed it to the table and leaned back in his chair, looking tired. Did you know what his orders were? No, but from what I have heard, I have a good guess. He gestured to the paper and Martin picked it up as he was the closest. With each word, Martin's face drooped. He handed it to me. By order of Lord Durbin, acting regent of the Asheran kingdom and highest-ranking individual on this planet, I hereby order you to gather your forces and vacate the displaced barracks. You are to turn over the kingdom seal to the man who presented you with this order. You will march your men south to Durbinton, where you will swear fealty. Failure to do so in a timely manner will result in you and your entire command being labeled traitors to the crown. Your titles and land will be forfeit and a bounty will be placed upon your heads. By the grace of the king and the crown. Lord Gabriel Durbin, Royal Inquisitor. I winced at the harshness of the letter as I handed it to Fiona. Well, that sucks. Chapter 132, No good choice. An understatement, the tired-looking commander replied. Also complete and utter bullshit. Did you notice how he left off a specific time frame? I nodded. I thought maybe he just didn't know how long it would take for your men to arrive. The man gave a half-hearted smile, more emotion than he had shown other than looking tired. A man of Lord Durbin's position could have easily figured out how long it should take. No, this was a calculated choice on his part. No matter how hard we would push to get there, he can say we did not follow his orders. A tasteless trick by nobles but effective. So, he wants to get you under his thumb, and have legal recourse to take everything from you. Potentially. He would likely execute the lot of us instead of keeping us around. You really think he would go that far? Martin asked. Why wouldn't he? As far as the Asheran kingdom is concerned, he is in charge over here. Why not contact your king then? Martin inquired. The commander chuckled mythlessly. You think I'm on a first-name basis with the king? I may be a royal guard, but that doesn't give me any standing over a lord. Even if I somehow did get a hold of the king, who would he believe? Or rather, who would he be forced to believe? Martin thought it over before deflating. The lord. The commander nodded. So what are you going to do? Fiona asked. The commander shrugged. What can I do? I have to notify the rest of the garrison. Some of the surviving men are nobles. They must choose for themselves. As for me, I'm staying right here. If Lord Durbin wants to send contractors after me, then so be it. I will die as a loyal follower of the king, not as a puppet to some upstart lord. Seems like a stupid choice, I stated. The man's eyes blazed in anger. Perhaps to someone who has never had to fight for something he cared about, it would seem foolish. I wouldn't expect a lowly drifter like yourself to understand. I wanted to reply with a biting comment, but Martin gave me a look that said, not now. I held my tongue and let the commander's words roll off me. Perhaps we can help with your situation, Commander, Martin said. And how do you propose to do that? While my friends had their reasons to come here, so do I. While I can't help you with the Lord, I can help with the locals. I propose to help join your forces with the forces of the remaining townsfolk. A unified city will be much harder of a target, don't you think? Oh, and you think you will have more luck than we have, despite our numerous attempts over the last 8 months. Sometimes all it takes is a neutral party. Very well, I will attend this meeting, assuming you can even make it happen. Thank you, Commander, that's all I ask. If that is all, this meeting is done. Fiona, I am glad you are, okay. Your father would have been devastated to hear about your death. With that, the commander got up and walked out of the room. Well, it went better than I expected, I said right before Fiona punched me in the arm. Ow! What was that for? Stop being an ass, she replied angrily as she too got up and left. That's when I recalled how she idolized the commander. Martin watched her go before turning to me. Well, we have a lot of work ahead of us and little time. Should we grab Ska and see what we can learn about the other side? Might as well, just don't punch me too. Martin chuckled, I'll leave that job to Fiona, she has more strength anyway. I gave the man a sour look that only elicited more laughter as we left the room together. After discussing our plans with Frotsar and Ska, we decided to leave Ska behind. He wanted to hunt some more and the locals were jumpy enough as it was without bringing an off-worlder, especially a non-human one, to our meeting. Fiona would stick with him to keep him out of too much trouble, not that I expected anything in the area to trouble Ska, but better safe than sorry. We headed out after the commander gave us a crude map of the other locals' base of operations. I took the opportunity to ask a question that had slipped my mind during the meeting. Have any escaped slaves made it here? Slaves? The commander asked. Yeah, especially ones with slave collars around their necks. We haven't seen any slaves. There was a group of natives that arrived shortly after you departed but they joined up with the townsfolk. Perhaps the slaves did the same. I nodded. It was a possibility, although remote. The slaves would have had to approach from the southern end of town. Meaning crossing through the territory of the Royal Guard. That group I freed didn't strike me as a particularly stealthy bunch. That left a few options. Either the commander was right and they joined with the locals, they died during their trip, or they were recaptured by the Black Dragon. I hoped they had survived. They were unique as far as humans went. I hadn't encountered another human that was able to choose their race. The system being damaged and preventing that choice for me. It also made me realize I had never really asked anyone else about it. I would pick Martin's mind later, right now we had other things going on. The piled debris that blocked off streets was impressive if a bit haphazard. A tangled mess of vehicles, furniture, along with loose rocks and bricks made up the majority of the pile we were staring at. It stood nearly 20 feet high, a monument to mankind's triumph over garbage. I shook my head. A single earth mage would have been able to produce more effective barriers. It took Martin and me less than 2 minutes to climb the pile and land back on the street at the far side. The fact that 10 angry men appeared out of nearby buildings to surround us didn't even surprise me. Of course, they would have to keep the piles guarded, as shoddy as they were. Whoa, easy there, fellas, Martin said, raising his hands. He saw that I was not following along so kicked me in the shin. I grunted but raised my hands as well. Who are you and why are you here? Yeah, we don't want no outworlders, take your fancy shit and go. Outworlders? Martin scoffed, I'll have you know I was born and raised in Mississippi and my friend here is as local as you can get. I saw Martin gesture with his hand in my direction. He does have that stupid southern accent, a third man added. I saw Martin bristle at those words, but the other men didn't seem to notice. You didn't answer our first question, the original speaker asked, aiming a spear toward us that glowed with a silver light. My name is Martin, and my friend here is Paul. We came to try and help. Help? Help, how? Well, we would like to discuss that with your leadership, if possible. But generally speaking, to help make it safer for everyone in town. Bruce, let's just get rid of them, they sound like spies or some shit, the third man that from now on I would refer to as the idiot said. Bruce slapped the idiot upside the head. I didn't ask for your opinion, Greg. The idiot, formerly known as Greg, rubbed his head as he stepped off to the side. This was Martin's show, but I was curious as to what we were dealing with, so I used identify on the leader. Bruce Spartan level 12. I chuckled when I pictured the slender man among one of the Spartans from that movie. What are you laughing at? Bruce demanded, aiming the spear my way. Nothing, I just thought of something funny. The man didn't look mollified but I didn't particularly care. He was the highest leveled person here, there was little we had to worry about. My friend has a tic and tends to laugh at inopportune times, due to stress, he's also a bit of an idiot, Martin cut in. The man seemed to think about that for a bit before turning back to Martin. You have any weapons? Martin nodded slowly. You will have to turn over any weapons before you are allowed to see the council. Oh great, another fucking council, I thought. Did they just pop up like weeds because nobody could decide who should lead them? As long as they are returned when we leave, I don't see this as being an issue. Martin handed over his mono pistol, which was probably worth more than the entire gear of all 10 people surrounding us. I handed over my staff. Well, I kicked it over as it had fallen to the ground when I raised my hands. 2 men approached and frisked the 2 of us, before using plastic zip cuffs to tie our hands behind our backs. I realized these people were woefully ignorant of the world at large if they thought the handcuffs would hold anyone. They didn't even glance at my storage rings as we were frisked. It made sense seeing as they had walled themselves off and never left the town. They were likely surviving off scavenged food from the supermarket. As we were walked through the town by 4 of the 10 men, I heard one in the back whisper. Should we take him to one of the out-of-towners and have their levels checked? You going to pay the fee? That prick charges a meal voucher for every service. Besides, we captured these 2 without a fight, how high of a level could they possibly be? I thanked my high perception, otherwise I wouldn't have heard the conversation. It also clued me into the fact that at least one of the people here had come from Durbinton if they had an identification ability. God, every time I thought of that name of that town I found it more asinine. We were eventually led to a building that looked like a Masonic temple. You know, home of the Freemasons and Illuminati rumors. The reality was way more mundane though. Mostly they just had a banquet hall that they rented out, and a small bar for members only. Occasionally they would do some act of charity for the community. How do I know this? Well, my father was a member and we would come to a building similar to this twice a year when he was alive. The inside of the building was dimly lit by wavering candles, adding the strange scent of the flavored candles to the mix of old tobacco and the smell of so many old people, having come through the building in its prime. It was the same smell you got when you visited a nursing home. We were brought into the main hall, which was large enough to house maybe 100 people. There was a short stage on one end, more just a step than anything. Sitting behind a table on that stage were 5 people. They looked quite busy, writing on sheets of paper and handing them to others that sprinted out a back door. The keyword there was looked. My perception aided me again when I was able to spot the writing on one sheet. It was only for a second, but I could read it clearly. It was complete gibberish. I realized they were trying to put on a show of being important and I couldn't hold back my laughter. Everyone in the room stopped and all eyes turned to me. I couldn't help it, it was the funniest shit I had seen since the world went to hell. What is the meaning of this? One of the women behind the table asked in a pompous voice. I doubled over, laughing even harder. Apparently, that was the wrong response as Bruce shoved the butt end of his spear into my side. You will show respect to the council, he growled. I barely even felt the action, but I finally got myself under control as I stood up straight and wiped a tear from my eye. This got angry murmurs from the guards as they all aimed weapons at me. I was confused for a split second before remembering that I had been handcuffed. Whoops. Before the scene spiraled more out of control, Martin spoke up. Please excuse my friend, he is having a hard time and suffers from a condition that causes him to laugh at inappropriate times. Like that guy from that movie. One of the hall guards said. Exactly, Martin added. I thought that was a made-up condition. No, as you can see it's a real condition, Martin replied. The councilwoman that spoke before, piped in. Perhaps the guards here can take your special friend outside while we talk. I didn't bother fighting the guards and followed along quietly as 2 of them led me to a different room. This woman thought she was a big fish in a small pond when in reality she was a tiny fish in an ocean of predators. It wasn't even worth my time to be mad at her comment. Martin would work his magic and this deal with the commander would happen or it wouldn't. It was probably better if I wasn't there to fuck things up. Chapter 133, Mission Complete. The deal took Martin 3 weeks to hammer out. Most of that was wasted with that stupid council, mainly just the one woman. She kept trying to control everything and considering her class was called politician, it was no surprise. The fact that her level was only 7, spoke volumes of her talent. Nothing changed until they brought in someone who had the identify skill. I didn't recognize the man and he didn't recognize me or Martin. But that didn't stop him from turning pale when he read off our levels to the councilwoman. After that, the woman was less of a pain in the ass, and Martin was able to push through a meeting between the 2 groups. I saw well-hidden relief on most of the other counselors' faces. After having to perfect a stony exterior or face punishment as a slave, it was easy to see the telltale signs. It seems they had been hoping to come to some agreement with the commander but were bullied by the woman not to offer anything in return. I didn't know what she had on them to make her so effective at keeping control, and I didn't care. The commander wouldn't put up with it, but it was no concern of mine what happened to her. The actual meeting took no more than 3 days. It was a whole lot of posturing for insignificant gains, and I didn't even attend after the first day. I spent the next 2 days, along with Ska and Fiona, searching for the goblin nest. We eventually located it in the old high school. The building had been abandoned as it was too far out of town to defend by either group. That hadn't stopped goblins from claiming it and multiplying like damn rabbits. My first thought was to burn the place to the ground and be done with it, but the building was made from thick stone and concrete. Not much to burn. The hardest part was securing the myriad of exits to the building. With only the 3 of us, it wasn't possible. Knowing this was the case, we scouted the building. There were a total of 18 exits. Some were closed up, like the garage doors, and likely wouldn't be used. That still left 15 doors. I didn't include the windows in my plan because they were few and far between, and the larger ones were on the second floor. Splitting up would net us the best results, but none of us knew the layout of the building or if higher-leveled goblins were inside. "Some are going to get away," Fiona remarked. I nodded, pondering our options. I wished I had spent more time creating runic traps. They would have come in handy in this situation. "Okay, here's what we do. Clear out any goblins hanging around the outside of the building. Then Ska and I will head for one of the side entrances. This way the tighter halls will help us control the number of goblins coming at us at once. Fiona, watch the main entrance and kill anything that attempts to flee. Ska and I will drive toward the main entrance from inside. If it gets to be too much, just come join us." Fiona nodded, turning invisible as she hurried off. Ska split off as well. We could clear the goblins outside by ourselves without much issue. The goblins usually hung out in small groups, or alone, if they were trying to hide something they found. If this is all the creatures did, they wouldn't be much of a menace. But they always attacked nearby villages, according to Frotsar. The actual fighting was nothing to write home about. None of the goblins turned out to be above level 10, and that was the shaman. I had hoped for a rematch, but the shaman attempted to flee along with 10 other goblins. Fiona spotted them and easily took the group down. Some goblins did flee, but the 3 of us made a concerted effort to track down every last one of the little green shits. With that and the alliance finally settled, we dropped Frotsar off, retrieved our money from Lord Shithead, and headed back to Texas. 10 of the commander's men had left to follow the orders of the Lord. I shook my head at their stupidity, but it was their choice. Our work in this part of the world was over. I didn't plan on ever coming back. There were too many bad memories up here. There were a few changes I noticed on the trip back. One was that weird mushroom biome. Everything appeared wilted and dead. It was probably for the best since those spores were dangerous. The other change was a bit more of a concern. When we flew around the mountain over the sea, the cave entrance we had created was gone. It meant someone had repaired the hole and taken up residence again. Nobody tried shooting at us though, not that they could see us with the cloak up, but it was a worrying development. I would keep my eyes and ears open for any hint that people were being attacked in the area again. Pinging Reaper didn't get me any hits, which wasn't surprising. I didn't know what to do about the Stygian order, and until I got a lead, nothing I could do. Houston hadn't changed much. The wall had steadily expanded in the month that we were gone, getting close to walling in another section of the city. If anything, the city and surrounding area seemed less dangerous. I knew the marshal and his men made a great effort to clear out monsters of all sorts from the surroundings. Of course, our team helped with that goal. I had turned off the cloak as I neared the city. I knew one of the marshal's men would spot us and let him know we were back. I set the fortress back down in our familiar parking lot and waited for the weight to settle on the landing legs before letting out a sigh of relief. It was good to be home. The marshal was the first person to greet us after we arrived. "I assume that since you are back that you were successful." "We were." "Then congratulations are in order." I accepted the outstretched hand and shook it. "I'm glad all of you have returned. After so long we figured something might have happened. I needed to go to my old hometown to see an old friend. Then we got caught up in some local politics. Martin can fill you in if you are interested." "It's always something," the man groused. "I would offer to throw a celebration, but I know you aren't much for those." "Thanks, really, I just want to rest. A few days of doing nothing will do us some good. Then I can start on making Houston the shipping hub of the area." The marshal nodded. "We never did get approval for more funding." "That's fine, I'll build it myself and hire workers. The mayor will be kicking himself when he learns how much money I will be raking in." The marshal chuckled at this. He didn't much care for the mayor either, but he was a public servant, even before the system. Martin and Fiona headed off with the marshal. I knew the two of them were going to clue the marshal in on Fiona's condition. Also, Martin wanted to get caught up with what happened in his absence. "You sticking around or going hunting?" I asked Ska. His throat rumbled while he thought about it. "I will rest a day, then I will hunt. Will you join me on occasion?" "Sure, we also need to have a duel, it's been too long." He rumbled in approval, jumping onto the fortress and running toward the top to sun himself. I shook my head as I pulled out an awning from my ring and set up a hammock below. I plopped into the hammock and drifted off to sleep to the sounds of small wildlife that had returned to the city. A month went by in a blur. I had the duel with Ska, who finally bested me in combat. I didn't make it easy for him though, and it was only a mistake of footing making me slip that ended with him taking the match. As proof of that, our next 3 duels went my way. But they were closer matches. The two of us hunted more criminals and wildlife, occasionally joined by Fiona. Martin was busy as the summit now included 4 other cities to the northwest, west, and even one in the south, across the old Mexican border. Today was my day to work on the barges. The preliminary work to find a suitable barge, gather the materials, and somehow get the damn thing on land had taken longer than expected. It had taken posting a job offer in the city. Now I had 3 earth mages in my employ, much to the anger of the mayor. It wasn't my fault he wasn't paying the earth mages to help build up the wall. Besides, he still had 2. I lucked out though, as 2 of mine were civil engineers, prior to the system. With their help, we quickly, well, they did mostly, construct a dry dock for the barges. Then all I needed to do was pump the water out and the barge would settle on the pylons. It took days to pump the water out, using the industrial pump I sourced. I had plenty of mana engines to power the unit. The earth mages also reinforced the warehouse walls that we had commandeered for the project. The dry dock was located over 10 miles from the walled-off section of the city. So secure transport needed to be provided for my employees. While they built the dry dock, I assembled a ground-based vehicle for them to use. It wouldn't do to have a dump truck-sized critter like the porcupine attack them while I wasn't around. I arrived at the entrance to the warehouse. The thick steel door was layered in runes of protection. I didn't include defenses like the fortress, that would be overkill. There wasn't anything in the warehouse, I just used it to lay out the runic plates I was working with. And I stored those away before I left each night. I was about to get to work when one of the mages entered from the dry dock entrance. "Boss, we got a bit of a situation out here." I looked up with a frown. I think the mage's name was Charles. "What sort of situation?" Best if you see for yourself." I sighed but followed the man outside and around to the dry dock where I heard people yelling. What met my eyes was a group of people dressed as if they had freshly walked off a golf course, yelling at the other 2 mages. I only caught the tail end of the argument. I demand that you stop at once." "Can I help you, folks?" I said, stepping up next to my employees. "Are you in charge here?" the man demanded. "Depends on what you are referring to." The man gestured to the dry dock, spittle flying from his lips. "Yes, this is my project, what of it? I demand you stop at once." "Why would I do that?" "Because, those barges belong to me, and I never gave you or anyone else the authority to use them." "I don't see your name on them," I answered back, crossing my arms. "Then, open your fucking eyes, you moron." "My name is on the side," the man said, emphasizing every word before he went to poke me in the chest at the last word. My hand whipped out like lightning, bending the offending wrist back with a snap. The man cried out and his cronies or guards reached for weapons, but I wasn't done. I kicked the man in the knee, eliciting another snap before I grabbed him by the throat and hauled him toward me. I did this all before his goons could draw steel. "Pull out those weapons and I will break his neck. Then I will do the same to you 3. They paused, frozen in indecision, so I continued. "I don't give a fuck who you are, or if this shit belonged to you before. It's mine now. You have a problem with that?" The man I was holding shook his head. "Good, now, why don't the 4 of you run off, and if I see you fucktards bothering my people again, I will not go easy on you. With my last words, I shoved the man at his goons and walked away. They quickly pulled him along as they rushed off. Fucking dickwads, I muttered. You sure that was okay? Charles asked. Those people are from that fancy gated community. Fuck 'em. I haven't seen those elitist pricks lift a finger to help anyone around here. If they want to pick a fight with me, I will show them the error of their ways. How is the draining coming along? I asked, changing the subject. The mage looked at the retreating people a second before responding. Almost done, another day and it should be good. We had to patch a hole that was letting water seep in. All right, keep up the good work. The interaction put me in a sour mood, but I had work to do. Too many people still thought money equaled power in this new world. The only thing that truly mattered was power. If I were so inclined, very few people could stop me from taking over Houston. Not that I wanted that responsibility. I was happy with what I had, a few good friends, and a way to leave everything else behind. Chapter 134, Merchandising. The dry dock was ready and the old barge rested on pillars of stone a few feet above my head. I was examining the bottom to check for any issues I would need to deal with before attaching the plates. There was a thick layer of barnacles that needed to be removed, but they proved to be not as strong as I was as I scrapped them away with a wide blade, enhanced with magic. The creatures were between levels 2 and 8. I had the mages take care of them, essentially free experience, though it didn't add up to a lot. The dirty work took about 2 hours and I finally had a clean-ish underside. It was still rusty from lack of maintenance, but it would have to do. Since this was being designed to be as rugged as possible, I would be welding the plates in place. As with the fortress, there were more plates than needed and half could fail and still keep the barge aloft. It wouldn't be fast, there wasn't enough surface area in the front or rear to mount a significant amount of the mover plates. And it weighed significantly more than anything else I had built, even eclipsing the fortress in tonnage. The work went quickly with the help of the mages. Having them position the plates and hold them in place with earth magic allowed me to focus on welding. My skills as a welder were sub-par, but I had practiced on scrap metal while I waited. It would be acceptable for the purpose. Maybe for the next project, I would hire an actual welder. I'm sure a few survived. In 2 days, the first floating barge was complete. It had 4 short stout landing pads in the corners. Just tall enough to keep the bottom from scraping on a flat surface. There were enough parking lots and roads to set the thing down pretty much anywhere. It was large though, at over 200 feet long and about 75 feet wide. It was just a flat platform, designed to be pulled behind a tugboat. I got rid of that restriction by adding a raised steering platform to the rear, similar to most ships. That had been heavily reinforced by runes, giving it the same amount of protection as my fortress had. Anyone attempting to assault the ship would find breaking into the steering section a daunting proposition. There was no defensive magic aside from a light shield that kept everything about from getting buffeted by the wind. The monoheart I embedded into the control console and out of sight. It would have to be ripped apart to get at it, destroying the mechanism in the process. The only thing visible was a silver filigree of mithril that allowed the operator or another attendant to charge the vessel. I figured a 500 capacity monoheart was more than sufficient for the first test. So who wants to go with on the maiden voyage? I asked, looking at my 3 employees. They looked at each other before Charles spoke up. No offense, boss, but I prefer to stay grounded. I grunted in amusement at the unintended joke. Suit yourselves. You might as well get to floating the next barge into the dry dock. If this thing works as well as I suspect, we are going to get busy soon. Once people realized they could make a shit ton of money by shipping goods with me, I would be busy. The 3 left the barge while I began the power-up sequence. It quietly rose into the air and maneuvered around as well as I would suspect a massive barge to maneuver. I rotated it to point back toward the ocean. If it did fail, at least it would still float. The only cargo aboard was a modified vehicle to get back to shore with. I was tempted to see if it could hold the weight of the fortress, but I had made my landing struts on the fortress a few feet too wide. Maybe I could get one of the massive dock cranes working to stick some cargo containers aboard for testing. I would keep that in mind if this test went well. I increased thrust until I was cruising at the maximum speed of 20 miles an hour. I smiled. Faster than your shitty tunnel. I yelled, cruising around the harbor. Gaben fumed as he rested on his porch, overlooking the ocean in the distance. His broken bones had been set by a neighbor of his that had been a doctor prior to the fall, and now had some strange class called mender. Why not just call it a fucking doctor, he groused. That man had humiliated him in front of his friends and his private security had done nothing to stop him. He had fired the guard immediately upon returning. There was a knock at his front door and he heard his maid go to answer it. Most of his staff had stuck around, promises of security able to get them to stay and pick classes befitting of their station. Some had left and some had tried to attack him, neither of those groups had survived. Not that he much cared. He still paid his loyal people with good old US dollars. He had convinced them that the money was still good, thanks to his class called inducer. It wasn't exactly brainwashing, more like inserting suggestions, and it only worked on weak-minded people. Then again, Gaben was only level 6. Mr. Gaben, Mr. Rosewell is here to speak with you. Oh, he hadn't seen Edward in months, not since some sick bastard killed his little girl. Send him in, Consuelo. It's been a while, Edward, what brings you by? A person of mutual interest. Oh, and who might that be? He asked, intrigued. I finished the shakedown cruise after 2 hours, only losing one plate that broke away. The section I welded it to, had been too rotten to support it. Not a big deal, I had spares, but that one was lost to the ocean. The barge was capable of cruising at 500 feet, same as the Fortress, but it used less power, around 200 feet. I marked that down in the user's manual I was having to create. There was also a new addition to the design, a panel that displayed the condition of the plates. It was just red or green, it's how I knew I had lost a panel. It was simple enough to operate. I was going to add a similar panel to the Fortress. There was a tiller to steer and an adjustable lever to change the height. Not much to it other than learning how the barge handled. I moved it next to the dock and set it down in the water, another benefit of using a barge instead of something else. I tied off the ropes and jumped onto the dock. It was a half-mile away from my dry dock but near the crane and had easier access to help people and goods board. Even if I couldn't get the crane working, wagons could still get on by crossing the ramp. I didn't have time to play with the crane today, I needed to find willing participants that wanted to make some money. Heard you had a row with one of the rich folk, the marshal said, catching me as I was walking past his office building. Just some ass sticking his nose where it doesn't belong. Why did he come complaining to you? The marshal nodded, not him specifically, but a lawyer friend of his. Kept spouting about an assault and the law and that I needed to arrest you and blah blah blah. I simply told him, that if the law still stood, that the barges were considered abandoned and no longer belonged to Mr. Hewitt. But I would appreciate it if you would stop going around and hurting folks. Eventually, someone is going to get ideas that I can't keep the peace around here. I can't guarantee that, but I will try. But I won't back down if some stuck-up prick comes trying to take what doesn't belong to them. Fair enough. Where you off to anyway? Heading into town, the barge is up and running, now I need some enterprising merchants to sell the idea to. Well, good luck with that. Martin should be at the courthouse if you wanna go say hi. Thanks, I think I'll do that. The marshal tipped his hat as he turned around and walked back to his office. As I walked, I thought back on the last few weeks. It was a change of pace from what I was used to, but it was nice. At least for the moment. I would be back to fighting monsters and people bent on evil soon. With that in mind, I had condensed my skill set, getting rid of skills that were not useful and seeing what Void Lottery earned me. I dropped Acidic Coating, Reflect, Nightwalker, Wall of Thorns, Brute Strength, Protection, Shroud, Lifelink, Monolink, and Word of Power. These were skills I didn't use or frankly didn't want to use, as in the case of Word of Power. Losing a permanent point of intelligence didn't seem like a good trade for a spell that could only be used one time. Monolink and Lifelink just weren't that good. Not for as high a level as they had come from. Sure, Monolink gave me the ability to recover mana by attacking, but the percentage was so low as to make it useless in a fight. Lifelink would help my allies, but its duration was extremely short and you had to be close to the target for it to be of any use. I would be better off healing the person myself. I also had a theory that higher leveled spells might produce a higher level return. What I got in return was a bit surprising. Frost Wave, produce a 10m long cone of freezing air that coats everything it touches in ice, reducing agility by 3 in the area and causing anyone caught in the spell to take int X.2 modifier frost damage. Cost 80 mana. Cooldown 30 minutes. The first spell I got was a decent attack spell. It wasn't as damaging as Earth Fist, but with the cone, it was far more effective against a group of enemies. It also reduced agility, which many melee builds seemed to max out. I wouldn't be surprised to see more fighters in the future with agility above the cap, similar to Ska. Victorious shout, your voice is a beacon of hope to your allies. Reduce damage to allies by 20% for 3 minutes. Cost 100 mana 25 stamina. Cooldown 1 hour. Damage reduction of any sort was a huge boon. It was certainly better than straight armor, considering all the skills that could bypass armor. The flavor text made me think that if the person casting the spell fell during the fight, it would have disastrous consequences for anyone under the spell. What those were, I couldn't say. Corrupting touch. Your touch causes the affected surface to quickly decay and putrefy, dealing int x2 damage per second for 10 seconds. Cost 10 health 85 mana. Cooldown 5 minutes. This spell was a damage over time ability that did massive damage, or it did with my high intelligence. It also gave me a counter against those nature-based creatures like that nature elemental and its stupid fast regeneration. Summon Pygmy Goat. Summon a level 1 Pygmy Goat to keep you company. Summon cannot attack and only has 1 health. Each day the goat remains alive, it gains a level and 100 health. Cost 1 mana. Cooldown resets when goat dies. I wasn't sure what to think about this spell. What would the goat even be good for if it couldn't attack? I guess it could be used as a meat shield if you managed to keep it alive for a few days. Then I imagined what a goat that was alive for a year would be like. Not that I expected anyone with this sort of spell to be able to keep a goat alive for that length of time. Perhaps the class it was derived from had synergistic abilities to use with it. It was on the chopping block for Void Lottery. Cannibalize, reduce an item to its component parts or extract precious ores. Item must be held to be applicable. Cost 35 mana. Cooldown 20 minutes. At first glance, I thought this was some disturbing ability to eat other humans. Thankfully, it turned out to be rather benign in nature. It made me think it had come from dwarves or even gnomes with its description. Perhaps it would be useful, time would tell. It wasn't a bad set of skills overall, but not the bounty I had hoped for. Oh well, at least I would use these skills. I arrived at the city and spoke with some of the merchants that had set up shop around the outside of the bazaar. A few seemed interested, but most were skeptical of my claims at easy-to-reach and safe trade locations. I set the hook by offering the first trip free of charge. About half the merchants took me up on the offer and I notified them of the locations we would be visiting. This way they could arrange for what to sell better. I wasn't worried about having a full load of sellers. Once word got back to town, more people would seek out the opportunity. But those wouldn't make nearly as much as the adventurous merchants. With that bit of business out of the way, I went into the bazaar to purchase some more components for my next barge. Unfortunately, I realized I was almost out of funding again. After we had returned to Texas, the 4 of us had gone through the loot from the dwarven stronghold and sold it off in the bazaar. Fiona wanted me to take her cut, but I refused, sticking it in one of the hidden rings within the fortress. I had a feeling she would eventually be able to remain in her human body at some point and she would need the money. That haul had made the 4 of us extremely rich. Even more so than selling off the mana cannons. My cut had quickly been spent on expensive rune crafting components. Mithril and the mana hearts being the most expensive of the bits. After my purchase today, I was left with 500 credits and enough material for a second barge. I decided to sell a few more of my runic weapons as I needed just a bit more money to purchase 2 replacement staves. The bone of these staves was a dark grey instead of the white of my previous ones, and I had 2 different staves built. One had the same style of ends with the short spike, but the other had one end that resembled a stylized lion and a roaring dragon on the other. It was ridiculous and over the top, but presented a powerful image to anyone that saw it. I wanted to try and make a masterwork weapon, and starting with a superbly crafted staff would make that much easier. After my shopping spree, I went in search of Martin. Chapter 135, Unfinished Tasks. I found Martin where the marshal said he would be, but he was in a meeting. I decided to hang out with Fiona until his meeting ended. Been a while, how's everything going? Good, but having to wait around can be tiring. I don't know how Martin can enjoy politics this much. I chuckled, just another challenge to conquer. Much easier than dealing a fatal blow to another person, I imagine. I guess you're right, at least I still have our evenings together, she added quietly. Is something wrong? No, well, not exactly, just something not physically possible. I didn't want to think about her and Martin getting intimate. Fiona sighed, I want to be a mother. Oh. Oh. Can't get pregnant because you revert to your spectral form. She nodded sadly. Well, it doesn't seem like it will be that way forever. I mean, you've gone from being dead to having a physical form. I know, but it seems like all progress to expanding that ability has come to a halt recently. Do you think it has anything to do with you being my spectral companion, and since I haven't grown, neither have you? I don't know, it's not like there is much information about this process. But I think you might be partially correct. I only seem to get expanded abilities when I put myself between you and near death. Well, that isn't ideal, is it? She gave me the look. No, no it isn't. That isn't good for me either. It's not like I enjoy being at death's door, even if I do enjoy a challenge. I planned on heading out on the barge in a few days if you and Martin want to join me. Martin is busy with these negotiations, so I doubt he will be available anytime soon. But I might as well join you. Is Ska coming along? I'm not sure, I haven't seen him much since we returned. He spends most of his time with the marshal's men rounding up criminals. If he's around we can ask him. Just then the door to the meeting room opened, accompanied by angry shouting and a group of disgruntled people shoving past Fiona and me. One of the men tried to shoulder shove me out of the way, only to fall on his ass, earning a glare from his buddies. The man looked accusingly at me before he got to his feet and joined his buddies down the hall. What was that all about? I asked Fiona. No idea, they usually aren't this angry after a meeting. That would be my fault, Martin stated, walking up to us. Oh, I thought you were the man with the silver tongue. I saved that for the ladies, he said with a wink toward Fiona, who glared at him. There better be only one lady that you use that on. Whoa, you know I would never, ahem, anyway back to what you asked, Paul. They are angry that they aren't getting preferential treatment to access the bazaar. Seems like a small matter. It would be, but the mayor decided to use the bazaar as a bargaining chip, but he wants to wield it like a blunt instrument. Didn't he give Hornwell rights to access the bazaar though? He did, and that is one of the reasons they are angry. They want the same rights as the Hornwell deal, but that was in place before the mayor's change of heart. What is he asking for in return? The mayor wants half of their rich ore deposits for access to the bazaar. And that was after I talked him down from 65%. They offered 20, and that is more than fair, but I can't get a deal to happen until someone folds or something major changes. Sounds like a fucked up situation all around. But maybe I can help. I recently finished the first barge. In a few days, I am taking some merchants on a trip around the area to sell their stuff. Martin rubbed his chin and thought, that may work. It could take a few weeks until things start to tip away from the mayor. I don't think he understands just how overpriced everything is in the bazaar. Wait, it is. Oh, yeah, big time. There is a local chemist that is creating health potions for half the cost of one from the bazaar. The mana portions aren't quite there yet, but they only cost 80% as much. As people's skills grow, the price will only go down. Plus people will remember the mayor's greed and reluctance to share access to the bazaar, souring relations further down the line. Access to the bazaar will still have some value though, right? I mean, why not just sell your items there instead of selling them at a loss outside? Sure, but mainly for individuals. Or for esoteric things that are hard to come by on Earth. As for selling outside the bazaar versus selling inside, that's easy, less competition. While you may charge less, if there is nobody else supplying the item, you essentially control the market. You also can sell more volume, offsetting the costs. Makes sense. I guess I now have a monopoly on trade and magic gear. Yes you do, my fabulously wealthy friend, he said with a big smile, slapping his arm around my shoulder. I just shook my head ruefully. Martin and Fiona had to go, more meetings and other things to do. That was fine, I needed to go to the fortress and rune craft my new staves. I was itching to try out some new combinations I had come up with. Before I went there, I checked in with the marshal. Ska wouldn't be back for at least a week, according to him. 5 of the marshal's men along with Ska were tracking down a group far to the west. I guess that left Fiona as my only company for when we left. It would be like old times and I looked forward to it. The fortress was quiet and empty when I made my way inside. I grabbed a cold beer from the fridge and headed to my workshop. I plopped down on my chair and sneezed as a thin layer of dust rose up. I grunted as I rose back up and turned on the air filters. I hadn't been in the room in almost 2 months. It seemed almost sacrilegious of me to avoid the place for so long. As the ventilation fan kicked in, I took a towel and brushed the dust off of everything, letting it float through the air until it was swallowed up by the vent. I didn't want anything interfering with my carving, and a sneeze at the wrong time could ruin an item. I looked over to the corner of the room where my failed railgun project lay in pieces. I had figured out how to make it work, but it was so finicky that it wasn't worth the effort. A monocannon was much simpler to produce. Speaking of monocannons, I had designs for a much more improved model, that could focus the energies into a tight beam. It was closer to a particle cannon than a laser, but calling it a monoparticle cannon sounded stupid, so I dubbed it the monolaser. The design was still in early testing and I wouldn't be fiddling with it today. No, I had new weapons of my own to build. I pulled out both staves and set the ornamental one off to the side on a rack I had built. I planned on filling that rack with all sorts of staves when I got time. The first stave was easy to construct as I already knew the basic framework from making it in the past. I was thinking of dropping the ability to shrink, but decided to keep it for this staff in particular. There was no telling when I would come across the need for a smaller weapon. Seeing as I had time shudder now, there was less need to blind my opponents. The pain aspect was also being less effective as the creatures and people I fought grew in power. I kept the spiritual siphon as it had saved me more than once. I replaced the old runes with a new combination I had developed. It was another set of siphoning abilities and merged well with the first. One siphoned off stamina and the other mana. When I finished, I inspected the staff. Consuming Void. Quality, exquisite. Damage as staff, 22 to 45 bludgeoning / piercing / spiritual siphoning / mana siphoning / stamina siphoning x3 critical damage. Damage as mace, 15 to 25 bludgeoning / piercing / spiritual siphoning / mana siphoning / stamina siphoning x3 critical damage. This dark chalbast bone staff is capped with an osmium mithril alloy, engraved with runic enchantments to consume stamina, mana, and strike out at the ethereal. A separate enchantment allows the staff to shrink down to half its length to act like a mace. I grunted in annoyance at missing the masterwork quality. As for the rest of the staff, I was more than happy. I did wonder if the naming convention had anything to do with my class. I kind of wanted to know what a dark chalbast was and why such a beast had bones the color of dark ash. I set the staff aside and picked up the other one. I rubbed my hand over the surface, examining the two heads. This one was going to take some time to complete. I needed to figure out how I wanted to lay out the runic pattern. As for the actual runes, that was going to be interesting. For the dragon-headed side, I had stumbled upon a rune combination that enhanced elemental damage. It took a lot of runes to cover all the elements though. For the lion side, I had only come up with that specific set of runes after our encounter with the orc chief. When I used shockwave to slam him into the ground, it gave me an idea. One I spent a considerable amount of time trying to replicate in rune form. It turned out, incorporating some of the runes I had used in my railgun design had been the answer. The tricky part was going to be getting all the runes to play nice. This was where my new cutoff came into play. No more exploding weapons for me. Consuming Void already had it built in. It was simple enough to implement the safety feature. Now if my hands left the staff, all magic would go inert, or that was the idea. It was still possible some magic could detonate, but it would be far less than before. I figured out my plan of action and got to laying out the design with a magical stencil I had picked up. It left no marks but would leave a glowing blue imprint of where everything should be. I hadn't bothered on the other staff, wanting to see if I could accomplish a masterwork with my own skill. I wasn't quite at that level yet. It was a good thing I had the stencil. I had to start over 4 times before the layout properly covered the staff and both heads. Now came the grueling work of carving in the runes. It took me a full 12 hours to carve every painstaking rune into the staff. Thankfully rune crafting was rather forgiving. The runic geometry, as I came to calling it a simple knot, didn't seem to do it justice anymore. Took a few hours and had to be completed in one go, or it might not be possible to match the exact movement of the previous attempts. But each separate rune could be carved at any time. When I felt fatigued, I rested. Even so, the actual work took 8 hours. The end result was worth every drop of sweat as I watched in awe as the ends of the staff changed. The dragon's scales went from dark silver to a multi-chromatic look. And while the lion head didn't change color, just looking at it felt like it weighed on your soul. I wasted no more time and inspected the staff. Dominion and Destruction. Quality, Masterwork. Damage, 28 to 50 bludgeoning x3 critical damage. Dragon Head, enhances all elemental abilities used by the wielder. Lion Head, imparts a crushing force equal to 10 times the wielder's strength when activated. Cost 25 mana. A masterwork weapon of dark chalbast bone and an osmium mithril alloy that imbibes the forces of dominion and destruction. Feel fear and tremble before my might. I let out a low whistle, giving the weapon a twirl. The dragon's head seemed to catch the light and reflect it like a stained glass window. The lion's head emitted an aura of authority, making you feel inferior just by gazing at it, but while I twirled the staff, that effect was amplified, making it seem like you were an ant standing before a hurricane. I really wanted to go test it out on some dumb schmuck. Chapter 136, Paul's Delivery Service. I spent the remaining day practicing with my new staves just to get a feel for them. I was more than happy with the results. The morning to leave came quickly and I was standing next to the freshly christened barge. Silk Road was the name my employees had decided on for the craft. I thought it was a bit presumptuous but didn't argue about it. There were certainly worse names they could have gone with. The barge rested in the same parking lot as the fortress, the ramp extended to allow the merchants to get their carts aboard. It seems a few more merchants had decided to take my offer as more than previously agreed to my offer got on board. That was a good sign that they saw this opportunity in a positive light. Fiona was spending the last hour with Martin before we left. Who could blame her? We were going to be gone for nearly 2 weeks. In that time we would hit up 8 different towns and also cross the spine to hit up that town we freed from the cartel goons. The last wagon of goods came aboard and I retracted the ramp. Please use the tie-downs to secure your goods for transport, I yelled over the noise of the merchants' conversations. A few looked around before they spotted the anchor points on the deck of the barge. Simple ratchet straps were included in a box on the deck. Most seemed confused, but they watched the few human merchants and figured out how to operate the devices. That had been another surprise. Most of the merchants I had convinced to come were Outworlder merchants. I guess I shouldn't have been too surprised as they were more familiar with the bazaar and its costs. Fiona appeared next to me just as the last merchants were securing their loads. Many of the carts reminded me of Frotzar's and I assumed they were magical in nature, allowing for the merchants to store an enormous amount of items for sale inside. Storage rings were nice for a single person's use, but even the most expensive ones could only carry 9 cubic feet of gear. You could have a master craft a larger one, but there were limitations on the magical framework available for items of that size. Even a necklace couldn't go far beyond that limit of storage. I had seen the inside of Frotzar's cart and it was like looking into a warehouse. The magic of the carts was also different than the rings. If a storage ring was destroyed, everything inside was lost. When Frotzar lost his cart, all of his items still existed. There was some weird pocket space and all he needed was another entry point created with that specific coordinate for him to be able to access it again. Frotzar hadn't told me this, but I overheard a conversation while I was roaming the bazaar. It was no wonder Frotzar didn't mention it. If you somehow got the coordinates, nothing was stopping you from having an entryway crafted to access those items yourself. This made those magical coordinates the most prized possession of any merchant. I waited a few more minutes for the merchants to settle before I spoke. Prepare for liftoff. I smiled at the concerned look on the merchants' faces before I stepped inside the control room and began powering up the barge. Fiona sat on the roof, swinging her legs back and forth in boredom. She had nothing to really do but keep me company, and we would have plenty of time to chat on the slow journey. There was a metallic groan as the landing gear scrapped across the parking lot while we rose into the air. A stray gust of wind had pushed us slightly before the directional plates stabilized the platform. In moments we were a dozen feet into the air and rising. The shield popped into place to protect us from wind and other small hazards, and I rotated us toward the west and our first destination. The first 3 towns were much the same. Small groups of people had gathered together to try and survive the new world. They had been notified ahead of time by the marshal's men that a group of merchants would be arriving to sell all sorts of goods. They were a bit surprised to see the flying barge, but that quickly faded as the merchants got to work hawking their wares. It was quickly realized that setting up a stall on the barge was much easier than carting the wagons off and bringing them back. They negotiated with me to just let them set up on the barge, and I reluctantly agreed. I got 2 things out of the agreement. A year-long contract from each merchant to use the barge services once a month and a quicker travel time. They got the ability to sell their wares as fast as possible. And when I say fast, I do mean fast. The entirety of the first town had flooded the merchants' stalls. And the merchants couldn't be happier about the sales. We stayed at each town for a full day, allowing people to come and go as needed. The second town was much the same, but the barge was packed with people to the point that I had to limit access. Let me on board, I need to purchase some items. Sir, wait your turn, the barge is full and you have all day to shop before we move on. I was starting to regret my hasty decision to allow the merchants to remain aboard. Don't you know who I am? I demand to be let on right away. I snorted, I don't care who you are, wait your turn or I will ban you from ever stepping foot on another one of my barges. That seemed to finally get through to the stubborn man as he stepped back and grumbled impatiently. I did actually recognize the man. He had been the rude bastard that ran into me after exiting Martin's meeting. He didn't seem to recognize me though. But then again, I was wearing my full armor. My weapons were not on display, but I had already shown one rude customer that I didn't need a weapon to deal with them. I also made a mental note to hire guards. Some of the marshal's men might like to earn a few extra credits for a simple job. As the barge cleared, I let the next group on board. The merchants had set their carts in any location they deemed ideal for sales, and I would have to put a stop to that on future trips. It made it a hassle for people to shop and limited the number of people that I could allow on board. It was our 6th stop when we ran into trouble. We were across the old Mexican border and an ex-group of cartel thought they could make an easy payday by forcing their way on board and taking what they wanted. I saw the group coming. It wasn't hard to spot them. The townsfolk got out of their way and the group was all armed with swords or hand axes. I think that's far enough, I stated, dominion and destruction appearing in my hand. The group slowed to a stop, glancing at me and my weapon before looking around. I knew what they were thinking. I was one man and they had 8. You will give us everything you have and we will let you leave with your life. If you resist, we will kill you and take it anyway, the leader said, pointing his machete toward me. I laughed. I had already checked all of their levels and not a single one was above 10. Well, what are you waiting for? Come see if you can take it, I stated, twirling my staff as I watched the gears in their heads turn. They came to the obvious conclusion as they tried to rush up the long ramp. Some were faster than others due to the activation of skills, but none matched mine or Fiona's speed. The dragon head on my staff took on an icy aura, turning a crystal-like blue color as I imbued it with ice and water. The ramp was a choke point that I used to great advantage, casting frost wave down the length of it. I had to take a step back as the chill even permeated my skin. The effect of the enhanced magic was devastating to the low-level thugs. The man in the lead was frozen solid and the extreme cold covered the ramp in a haze of ice, causing the remaining men to fall and slide back down. One man remained standing as he was behind the leader at the time. He jumped over the man's frozen form and came crashing down in front of me while screaming and making an overhead chop with his axes. I watched him descend, waiting until the last moment to use time shudder to avoid his attack. He seemed shocked by the miss, but he was more shocked as I shoved the dragon head into his face and released a stunning gust. The man was dead before he hit the ground at the end of the ramp. The spray of ice and water from the dragon's mouth had been far more potent than the ice from Frostwave. It was condensed into a solid jet of elemental fury, enhanced by the staff and further enhanced by the elemental powers I had imbued into the staff. As the man landed amongst his allies, his head impacted the ground, shattering like bloody red glass. The remaining men saw this and tried to run, but Fiona cut them down with swift, deadly precision. As the chaos came to an end, I heard clapping. When I looked over, I saw the people of the town bowing and clapping, thanking us for ridding them of these evil men. I was a bit embarrassed by the praise as I hadn't done it to help them. Due to the disruption, we remained a bit longer in that town. I allowed the people of the town to take the gear off the dead men. It wasn't any use to me and they seemed like they needed it more anyway. This had been one of the towns that Martin had visited, but they hadn't sent a representative to negotiate. That changed as a man approached me. "May I have a moment of your time?" the elderly man asked. "So long as it doesn't distract me from my duty." The man nodded. "I have heard that you came from Houston, is that true?" "Yes." "Would you be willing to bring a passenger there?" "For what purpose?" I asked, genuinely curious. Passenger services could open up a whole new market for me. When your representative arrived a few months ago, we had planned to send someone to discuss an alliance, but soon after the cartel men arrived. They had been drawn here by the running vehicle. It is no fault of your town or the man you sent, but because of that we were prevented from leaving the city limits. So now that they are dead, you want to send someone as quickly as possible. That is correct. We see the technology and opportunities that are possible with an alliance and we do not wish to be left out. The trip won't be free, but, instead of credits, perhaps something else can be arranged. I won't sell any of our people into slavery or prostitution, the man added forcefully. What? No, nothing like that. I am looking for people that would like a job. You see, I built this barge and I will build more, but I can't pilot all of them myself. The man scratched his chin in thought. Are you willing to accept anyone for this position, or do they need to have some sort of ability? They need to have a decent mana pool. The higher the level the better, but I can help with that. And what about trouble? the man asked, looking pointedly at the corpses piled below. I plan on hiring guards for that. I will pay per trip for each round trip from Houston on the route specified. Very well, I will discuss your proposal. You will remain here for the remainder of the day. I nodded. Okay, by the end of the day either the representation will come alone and pay in credit or he will bring some people with him. With that, the man walked down the ramp and over to a group of older people. True to his word, 3 people walked up the ramp near nightfall. Hello, I am Representative Castillo. Behind me are Javier and Maria. Javier is a venerable padre and Maria is a voodoo priestess. Both are willing to accept your offer for employment. I didn't need the man to tell me their classes as I had used Identify on all 3. Castillo Shepherd of Verity level 9. Javier Venerable Padre level 7. Maria Voodoo Priestess level 8. It seemed like an odd bunch to be together, but so be it. Welcome aboard. Javier and Maria, I will come talk to you before we leave. The 3 nodded as they stepped aboard. The 2 that wanted to join for employment were young. I doubted they were older than 17. I watched as the kids went their own way on the barge. So, no friendship between the 2 of them. I wondered if it had anything to do with their class choices. I could ponder it later, and so long as they got along while I trained them, it would be fine. Chapter 137, Around the Horn. The night went by quickly and we left early in the morning the next day. Javier and Maria were quiet but studious as I showed them the simple controls to the barge. I let each have a turn with the controls, to the horror of the merchants as we plummeted 100 feet when Javier bumped the height lever. Careful, I said in admonishment. That lever is very sensitive to height adjustments, and while the barge can't rise very quickly, it can fall as fast as gravity allows. The kid nodded, his ashen face from his position on the floor. He had fallen when the barge came to a sudden stop. I hadn't intervened in the error as I knew it would level out. I was also the only person braced for it to happen, as everyone, including the merchants, had fallen. Monitor the controls while I go out and see if anyone needs healing. Please, Mr. Paul, let me, Javier said, getting to his feet. I nodded as the kid moved past me on slightly wobbly legs. I turned toward Maria. Try not to crash us into the ground, I said with a smile. She blanched as she eyed the controls like her life was in immediate danger. I might have laughed if she wasn't mostly right. I hadn't shown the 2 how to feed mana into the system yet and wouldn't need to until after we landed. I figured it was better they focus on one thing at a time. So what do you think of those 2? I asked Fiona as I lounged on the control room roof. She shrugged. They seem competent enough, they are also willing to learn, so that's a bonus. Why do you ask? No reason, just wanted to get a second opinion. They remind me a bit of myself when I was younger. Strange, they don't seem like idiots. Oh, haha. No, quiet, driven, but unsure of themselves. Aren't all teenagers like that? It was my turn to shrug. It wasn't like I made a habit of befriending kids. Our last stop in Mexico was uneventful. The town was on the smaller side, but the locals were ecstatic to see us and purchase anything they could afford. The little hamlet had been a resort town before the system, but with no more tourists, most of the oceanside buildings had been left to rot. The remaining residents had moved to the farther inland buildings to avoid the predatory monsters that occasionally came out of the ocean. If I didn't have 2 weak people with me, I might have been tempted to see for myself. While the merchants were trading and taking orders for future sales, I showed Javier and Maria how to charge the system. You need to hold this key, I said, shaking the metal plate in my hand, then place your hand on this silver plate here. Wait, before we do that, do either of you know how to feed mana into items? They both shook their heads. Okay, not a big deal, I can show you. Watch. They attentively watched while I fed mana into my armor. Do you understand? Here, try pushing mana into these. I held out 2 tiny mana hearts and watched as they tried and failed to push mana into them. It took a couple of tries before Maria figured it out. Javier was a couple of tries behind her, but he got it as well. Good, now you see this bar here. I pointed at the energy level indicator. You should never let that drop below half unless you have no other choice. The barge can compensate by reducing height, but flying lower may not be advisable. But, Mr. Paul, it is only at 30%, Maria said. Correct. I did that so I could show you how to charge it. It won't self-adjust the height until it reaches a quarter charge. Now watch how I charge it. I didn't need the plate since I had my tattoo, but they would need to use it, so I held it in one hand and placed my other on the charging plate. The only reason I could still do this was the mana pathways built into my fake hand. The charging plate lit up to indicate it was working and the power meter slowly rose to 30%. Now you both give it a try. I want you to run yourselves as low on mana as possible. You need to know how much of a charge you can add, so keep that number in mind. As you level, that should increase. Javier went first, only managing 5% charge before he passed out from mana exhaustion. I sighed and hauled him over to a chair in the corner. The kid seemed to get a bit overexcited at times. I didn't know if he was doing it just to impress me or what. You're up next, Maria. Try not to go completely dry like Javier. She nodded and stepped up to the charging platform. She managed 7% before she pulled her hand away, stumbling. I braced her so she wouldn't fall, and helped her over to the other chair. Good. Maria seemed to have dedicated a few more points to intelligence over Javier. I found that a bit surprising, considering they both relied on mana heavily, but to each their own. Once Javier regained consciousness, I told the two we had one final stop before heading back to Houston. They both watched in awe as I brought the barge's power back up to full without breaking a sweat. It was a simple task for me as I expended only my mana regeneration without even dipping into my mana pool. I hadn't mentioned to them to control their mana outflow, but they would figure it out eventually. Some things were better learned than taught. It would leave a bigger impression that way. We headed out over the ocean on our way east. I pointed out the coast of Texas as we flew past and the area the dwarves lived, but I didn't mention the dwarves, only to stay away from that jut of land that I called the Horn. They nodded. I did have Fiona fly over and examine the area since we were near. She could easily outpace the slow barge to catch up with us. It's empty, she said upon her return. Empty. All the bodies and everything we didn't take is gone. Even the carved doors and any sign of habitation have been removed. If I hadn't seen it before, I would have thought it was just a cave system. I guess it isn't too odd that they would pack up and leave after finding the mess we left behind. I imagine some nasty underground critters will take up residence eventually. But it's good to know that that clan of dwarves isn't lurking around. The marshal will be glad to hear this as well. He had some of his men watching the mountain for any sign of them. He did? I wasn't aware. Martin asked him to do that. I'm glad, it was a good idea. We neared the other side of the mountain and I could see the town in the distance thanks to a telescope I had. I wanted to approach this town in the daytime because they were cut off from civilization by their location and the surrounding monsters. While I wasn't willing to ferry a bunch of civilians on this trip, perhaps another barge could be sent for anyone that wished to relocate. I hoped that most would stick around once they realized they would get supplies regularly. I wanted to use this city as my main port on the east side of the spine. With luck, the place would become a massive town like Houston as people flocked to its relative safety. That meant not spooking the civilians and having a word with our old friend Kurt. It was true that I hadn't left the best impression, but the man was kind of a fuck-up and I hadn't been in the best of moods back then. As we approached, I could see people running from the dock, and a dozen or so armed men appeared a couple of minutes later. I stopped the barge in a low hover, less than 20 feet above the water and a good 100 feet from the closest dock. We're here to trade, we mean you no harm. I yelled from the edge of the barge. Who are you and where did you come from? Kurt yelled back. Just a group of merchants from Houston. Could I come ashore alone and speak? I watched as the group conversed for a bit. Only one of you, Kurt replied. I held up both my hands with a thumbs-up gesture. They should be able to see that clearly from shore. You two monitor the barge, I'll be back in a bit. Okay, Mr. Paul, but how are you getting ashore? Maria asked in confusion. I winked at her as my wings erupted from my back and with a powerful stroke I launched myself toward the shore. 100 feet was easy to cover with my wings and I landed at the tip of the dock, well away from the armed townsfolk. You, Kurt pointed angrily. Nice to see you too, I said, slowly walking up to the group but stopping a dozen feet away. I could see the man warring with his emotions. He went from anger to acceptance and back to rage, but he settled on distaste. Are you here to cause trouble again? He growled. I didn't cause trouble last time I was here, I simply sold some weapons and got attacked by some local thugs. You should be thanking me for helping to rid your community of them. I saw Kurt stiffen as some of the other people present gave him questioning looks. I shook my head. Wow, even after they were dead you didn't tell them what happened? Do you want to explain it now or should I just tell them? What is he talking about, Sheriff? a younger man near him asked. Kurt glared at me but I just quirked an eyebrow. He caved under the questioning stares of his fellow townfolk. You remember those bodies from a half-year back? He got nods from most of the people assembled. He sighed before continuing. They were cartel and they had taken control of the town. They killed the mayor and threatened our families. Wait, is this why the rest of the police officers left? Some left, others were killed by the cartel's men for not bowing to their rule. So what changed? Another asked pointedly. Kurt gestured to me. He and his friends arrived in town, they started selling weapons to some of the locals and the cartel caught wind of it. There was a fight and the cartel was killed off. Wait, I do remember you, I bought a sword from you in that weird house, a man from the back said. Always glad to see a customer, I retorted. While it didn't appear that the citizens of the town cared for the way Kurt handled the issue, they didn't force him out of his position as sheriff. It was probably for the best, he had leveled to 14 since the last time I had seen him. The other people of the local militia seemed to be between 9 and 11. Considering how remote they were, it wasn't too shabby. The conversation got back to why I was here and I reiterated that I was bringing a bunch of merchants from Houston. They had all kinds of stuff to sell. I wasn't surprised when a few asked for me to take them with me but I had to turn them down. Some got angry but I told them regular deliveries would arrive every 2 weeks. They didn't look sickly so there must be ample food to be found nearby. My guess was most of it came from fishing. That proved correct when the merchants that brought food other than meat sold out the quickest. I saw some of the locals trading gems to merchants and I asked one about it. Oh, they come from the rock elementals. They are a real pain to kill unless you have explosives. But we have a guy in town that took a class that allows him to produce explosives. I nodded. I don't think I would have volunteered information like that but it seemed these people were hard up for any outside stimulation. They had been trapped on this plateau and cut off from anyone else for nearly a year. I learned from another local that after the bodies of the cartel were found, most of the remaining police officers took their families and fled north. I winced at this knowing north was straight through the rock elemental territory. I hoped they made it, but from what we learned the last time we were here, it was a dangerous trek that had forced more than one group to turn around. Since Javier and Maria were taking turns recharging the barge, I was free to hang out. I saw Kurt approaching me late in the day. Most of the people had already finished their shopping by this point and the barge was quiet. I want to apologize for my behavior both from earlier today and from the last time you were here. If it wasn't for you and your friends, most of us would probably be dead by now. Apology accepted. Next time, don't be such a spineless ass. He bristled at my comment but it quickly passed. I deserve that, he paused, seeming to think about something before he spoke again. Will you be taking passengers on your next trip? Will I? No. But there will eventually be a passenger ferry. You should stick it out here though. Why? We have nothing, he complained. You have safety, do you know how rare that is these days? If you are willing to offer up a contract I can see about bringing an earth mage by next time. They can extend a wall around the entire city given time. And not too many are going to risk braving ocean travel. There are creatures down there that I don't want to deal with, I replied. I had seen the creatures on this trip. Massive sharks that would put Megalodon to shame not to mention the stuff we only saw shadows of, that dwarfed even the sharks. The world was bigger now, which meant larger and deeper oceans. Is it really that bad out there? It can be if you aren't prepared. Houston is a relatively safe town if you like being crammed in like a sardine. If you must know, Kurt, you are below average level-wise and completely ignorant of what the world is now like. If you plan on leaving the safety of this town, you may want to focus on gaining levels first. How can you see my level? See, this is what I mean. It's a skill, talk to one of the merchants about it, I'm sure at least one has it for sale. Thank you, I will think on your words. While it wasn't true that Kurt was under-leveled, if he wanted to survive here or anywhere else, he needed to get stronger. Perhaps this would be the push he needed to take that extra step. Chapter 138, Old Grudges. Edward Rosewell exited the bazaar. It had taken time and effort but he had located suitable individuals for his purpose. They would arrive within the month and do what they had been paid to do. The cost had been exorbitant but worth all of the credits he had spent on it. No amount of money would bring back his precious feline but this would give him some measure of peace. At first, his rage had been blinding and he wanted to strike out and kill the people responsible. With the help of his wife, he had gotten his anger back under control. Besides, when he asked around, it was clear that an attempt on their lives would end badly for all involved. Instead, he had watched and waited, paying informants for information. Nothing obvious but important nonetheless. His hard work paid off after the group had left town for places unknown. He was approached by an unknown woman, who handed him an envelope and walked away. When he read the contents, he wasn't even surprised. To think the marshal and the mayor had gotten into bed with someone like that. He couldn't rely on the local government to deal with the issue, for all he knew they were lapdogs to this Paul and his pet. Instead, he had located a dwarf from this clan mentioned in the letter. When he told the dwarf what he knew, the man hadn't stopped spewing curses for a full minute. The dwarf said his whole clan would arrive to bring vengeance down on the human and any allies. That had been when some of the money came into play. Edward didn't want the town of Houston damaged. The credits had gone to securing their bonded oath to not cause unnecessary damage to the area. With that, Edward's role was done. Now he only needed to wait for the dwarves to make their move before he could implement his plan. King Formus slammed his meaty fist down on the thick stone table, causing cracks to spread. "You're sure this information is accurate?" he roared at the communication mirror. "Yes, Your Excellency." The man possessed details that nobody else could know. "And what if he is working with this other group? Perhaps this is a trap, have you thought of that? But then why bother searching us out, my king? I spoke with some of the other dwarven merchants and it seemed he had been looking for our clan for a few days. Why take the risk? Perhaps, still we will be cautious in our approach. Have the spies gather information in the town and about our target and the man that approached you. We will make it look like we have pulled out of the caves and head your way. I want an update daily." "Yes, my liege." The communication mirror went blank and slid back into its protective pouch. The item was a priceless heirloom and only his most trusted agents had a fragment of the other end. If what his men had learned was true, it meant he finally had a direction to aim his rage toward. When he had finally arrived in this new world, the trip had been quite arduous. They followed the massive chain of mountains south, and when they arrived they were met by death. Whoever had done it had left only the bodies and other sundry items. They had stripped the dead of all gear, an affront to the dead that would be paid back in full, but they had also stolen everything in the vault. The sub-clan that had been transported here had become sloppy and hedonistic, but that was no excuse for the wholesale slaughter. It had taken his court wizard a full day to determine a powerful poison had been used. So the attackers had both profaned the dead as well as denying them the right to die in battle. If it turned out these humans did have his monocannons, the evidence against them would be irrefutable. He would burn their city to the ground and slaughter every last man, woman and child in revenge. Despite what the foolish human thought of the binding oath he made with a subordinate, Stone had timed her arrival in Houston with great care. She quickly delivered the evidence of what Paul and his companions had done to the dwarves and was gone within 2 minutes. It had been a risky play, but the timelines were becoming harder for the seer to read the longer Mr. Fuller remained alive. The decision hadn't come easy, as the council had been equally split, leaving the deciding vote up to the toss of a coin. Anyone who had watched the decision might think it was a silly choice, but a coin could not be swayed one way or another. Fate would decide the outcome, and so it did. When the coin landed, a choice was made and events were set in motion to deal with Mr. Fuller and his allies. Even the outcome of this choice was uncertain, with only a 70% chance of the dwarves gaining victory. It was more probable than the 40% chance of Mr. Fuller agreeing to join with the Stygian Order, as that had been the other option in debate. Both decisions carried consequences, but they were far less severe than leaving the man to his own devices. He should have done the smart thing and died along with Mr. Cotton in Chicago, she grumbled as she walked down the corridor of one of their outposts. Stone had voted for his death, the future needed to be secured. While it wasn't an ideal scenario, a direct confrontation had only a 5% chance of succeeding now that the Black Dragon was out of the picture. She had no hard feelings against the man or his friends, but the future needed to be maintained. Magic and mana had only exacerbated issues that had been around since before the Order was founded. If it wasn't for the Order, the world would have died to any number of magical and non-magical misfortunes by now. But they endured and would continue to do so long after she was gone, as they had since the Dark Ages. Their order had come under many names and monikers over the centuries, starting with the Knights Templar. Most nowadays knew them as the Illuminati, but they hadn't used that name since the 50s. Still, people had deduced quite a bit about their organization over the last 100 years. They did have a modicum of control over governments. Only enough to avert major disasters. Originally their goal was to keep humanity alive long enough for the nodes of the system to activate. But time and other organizations with more sinister goals had changed that. Those organizations had put their own plans in motion when they too discovered the nodes. Eventually, the order was forced to act ahead of schedule to try and mitigate the damage that the Black Dragon had perpetrated on the nodes. The damage from one node had spread to adjacent nodes quickly. Only the swift actions of the order had stopped it from spreading across the globe. If it had, the Black Dragon would have been nearly unopposed, as people were prevented from choosing classes. The system would have stuck them with a generic class that closely resembled their skill set before integration. This error wouldn't have affected the Black Dragon, as they had chosen their paths long ago. Anyone that had access to a node could do the same, along with other features that these entities took advantage of. The damage was done and billions of people died, but humanity survived, and the plans of the Black Dragon were thrown into chaos, forcing some to choose alternate classes. While the name of their order and their tactics may have changed over the centuries, their overriding goals had not. Humanity needed someone powerful in their corner, whether they liked it or not. The barge set down in the parking lot with a grinding shake. "Sorry, Mr. Paul," Maria squeaked out. "I had given up trying to get them to just call me Paul. Next time go a bit slower, you'll get the hang of it eventually. You two top off the crystal while I go extend the ramp. Then we can find a place for you to stay until the next trip." They both nodded, Javier a bit more enthusiastically than Maria. Both seemed to be getting more comfortable with the ship controls and around me. After extending the ramp, I was the first to step off. "Home sweet home," I said to Fiona as she appeared next to me. She gave me a squeeze on the shoulder. "I'm off to see Martin. If you see Scott, tell him I said hi." "You should tell him yourself. Why don't you and Martin come over? He owes me a good meal anyway," I added with a smile. "I'll see if I can drag him away," she replied with a wave. Representative Castillo was the next off the barge. "Thank you for the transportation. I will head toward the city and get in contact with the mayor." I pointed the man in the right direction. The merchants were quick to depart as well. I assumed they wanted to restock for the next trip, as all of them had made a ton of money. Profits would slow eventually, but by then we should have new stops opened up, or I suspected merchants would be willing to make their own way and the barges would become little more than shuttles to take them to their closest destinations. Either way, money would flow in. "Mr. Paul, we have finished recharging the barge and powering it down," Javier said. I looked at my watch. It had taken them a little over an hour. Not too bad. "All right, let's get you two some rooms and a good meal. Tomorrow I'm going to take you out to level." "Won't that be dangerous, Mr. Paul?" Maria asked. "Not too much. The dungeon is only level 12. With me there you shouldn't have any trouble. The biggest issue is watching out for traps, but I'll be there to assist." Neither looked entirely convinced, but I ignored their hesitation. If they wanted to captain the barges, they needed to level a bit. Getting them to level 15 would be ideal, but I wasn't sure I had the time to do that. I had run the dungeon about 10 times and there were no new mysteries to be had. Dungeons didn't change unless some other monster took up residence. That was unlikely with this one, as the marshal had it guarded around the clock. His men used it to grind out a few levels and give their weaker members a boost. I now understood why people were not fighting over the dungeons in other worlds. Other than horde dungeons, there weren't any glorious treasures to be had. At most you could gain crafting supplies or a few items of worth. Oh, and the titles. Still, most of the dungeons I had been in were downright awful experiences, making it not worth the effort for most people. It was a good thing I wasn't most people. I was able to find a hotel that had running power, a newer development, and booked a room for the two kids. We ate a quick meal together and they headed off to sleep. I made my way to the warehouse to see how work was progressing on the second barge. I had hired a skilled welder and all the plates were laid out on the blueprint. That left only the work of connecting everything together for me. I could see the barge in the dry dock and the glow of the welder working away below it. One of the mages spotted me as I approached and gave a wave. "How is the work coming along?" "Good, it should be complete in another week. Timothy, the welder, suggested you bring the other barge back so he can inspect your welds." "That's probably a good idea. Since I'm here I might as well get started on the power systems." "Any issues while I was away?" "No, although that angry gentleman came around a few times. He didn't harass anyone though." "Okay, I think I will hire a few guards just in case. It seems like that man didn't get the hint the first time." The mage nodded. After our conversation, I flew to the barge and got to work. I worked for a few hours uninterrupted, making good progress on laying out the control lines. "Oh, hey boss, didn't know you were back," the welder said, wiping his face with a towel. "How's the work going?" "Good, I might need some more welding rod if you have time to look. Is it an urgent need? No, but I will need it to work on any more barges, and that includes the one you worked on. Alright, I'll see if I can't scrounge some up. Any issues with the welding? I inquired. A few, but a quick blast of sand scoured away the area enough for me to weld. I nodded. Timothy was a mage with sand powers. They weren't all that strong, but the way he utilized them with his pre-system skills made him a true asset. You heading out for the day? I asked. Yeah, it's getting dark and my wife will be worried about me getting home. Since you are here, I will leave the lights on below the barge. I assume you are going to work late. You assume correctly, Tim. I think the mages all left in the van, but feel free to take the truck, I said, tossing him the control plate. Thanks. By the way, my wife wanted me to invite you over to dinner sometime, if you're interested, of course. I'm not really good around a bunch of people, but I will think about it. Tell your wife thanks for me. Will do, boss, don't work yourself too hard. I waved off his concern. With my endurance at the peak of human potential, I didn't need more than 4 or 5 hours of sleep anymore. I looked forward to when I added points to see what Tier 2 strength and endurance brought me. I knew from previous fights that Tier 2 strength could shatter weaker shields. Getting more stat points was quite a ways off though, unless I located another horde dungeon. I worked until the wee hours of the morning and managed to lay down all of the mithril power lines to the plates on the bottom of the barge. It was time-consuming work to meld the lines into the structure of the barge, but nobody was the wiser after the camouflage runes took effect. I could see them thanks to the runes being carved by myself, along with my eye tattoo. Otherwise, they would just glow slightly in my normal vision. I dusted my hands off and got to my feet. I decided to head back to the fortress and get some rest. Tomorrow was going to be a long day. Chapter 139, Employee Training. I grabbed the collar of Javier's shirt and yanked him back just in time to save him from being split in half by a guillotine that dropped from a slot in the ceiling. He was being dumb trying to impress me again. I did have to reattach a few of his fingers though. You'll be fine in a few minutes, I assured the shaking teen. Just breathe and remember what I told you when we first arrived at the dungeon. He nodded quickly, breathing in and out as he shook. Always be aware of your surroundings. I nodded as the skin around his finger healed. While the kid was a bit reckless, it wasn't always a bad trait. He just needed to moderate himself. That includes the ceiling. And you should lead with your weapon or something disposable. He nodded shakily. How are you doing, Maria? I asked, focusing her attention away from Javier's wound and toward me. I'm okay, Mr. Paul. I nodded. Maria was a bit more mature than Javier, but I had seen her face go white at the sight of the blood pumping from his fingers. It was easy to tell that neither one had been in mortal danger their entire lives if it wasn't obvious from the low levels. My guess was they had only leveled by defending their village from monster attacks. That would be fine for most people, but I wanted my employees to understand the possible dangers out in the world. It's why I didn't get involved in the dungeon unless it was to save them from imminent death. It seemed to be working. Both teens had already gained a level each, putting Maria at 9 and Javier at 8. They were also more cautious now, which in my eyes was never a bad thing. I healed the last of the damage to Javier's fingers before we moved into the next chamber. The chamber sported 4 pillars in the center that held up a domed roof of a pavilion that tapered until it met the chamber roof far above. It also sported a dozen nasty spiked lizard creatures. The creatures were slow, but their camouflage made them blend into the walls and floor. If your perception wasn't high enough, you could miss them and assume the room was empty. Then they would surround you and attack all at once. The sharp spines could cut through the rock, so not much could stop them from tearing you apart, short of magical protection. I watched as Maria cast a spell that caused a purple mist to cover the floor in a large area. This elicited the shrieks of 4 lizards as they made their presence known and charged. Maria's skill set was mainly debuffs and damage over time abilities. She also had a control ability which she tried to use on one of the lizards. It froze in place for a second and turned to attack one of its friends. The other 2 lizards were stopped by a glowing white barrier that sprang up in their path, courtesy of Javier. It didn't delay them long as it was only a flat plane, but it was long enough for Maria to cast another spell. A crackling ball of violet energy spread out from her outstretched hands and impacted near one of the creatures. The lizard squealed in pain as the energy slowly distorted its limbs until there were audible snaps as the bones gave out. The last creature charged at Javier, who let out a frightened squeak before trying to back away. I clamped my hand over his shoulder to hold him in place. You're fine, you can handle one lizard, I could hear him swallow as he raised his hand and said a quick prayer. Golden light radiated out from him, blinding the creature and causing it to smoke slightly. While the attack wasn't enough to kill the lizard, it did stun it momentarily, giving Maria time to throw her short spear at it. The effort was weak, but it seemed to do the job as the creature fell over dead. The final two had nearly torn each other apart, and a quick bash from Javier's cane ended the survivor. The room clearing went quickly after that. I also made a note to get these two some decent gear. It would be a bonus for their hard work. The rest of the dungeon was rather uneventful, up until the boss room. The boss was a massive version of the spiked lizards, but instead of hiding like its smaller kin, it nested in the center of the room. It was also bright red, signifying its affinity toward fire. Not that it needed the coloring to do this. Its body radiated heat waves that turned the room into a sauna. The first time I had fought the creature, I simply covered the room with ice using Eye of the Storm. It significantly weakened the beast. I was curious to see how my young employees would handle the task, seeing as they had no ice magic. Javier gave me a worried glance before he began casting a spell. Maria joined him a second later with one of her own. I knew that the lizard wouldn't wake until it was attacked, making this the perfect opportunity to use spells that required a longer casting time. Javier's spell went off and the temperature of the room seemed subdued. The spell didn't directly attack the lizard, but the creature stirred anyway, readying itself to defend its home. Before it readied itself, Maria's spell erupted from her outstretched hands. Rings of purple and blue, that crackled with violet lightning, extended away from her, forming ever smaller rings until it looked like one of those ring toss games. A beam of energy that looked like a bruise coalesced inside the rings and shot toward the lizard, striking it in the flank. The lizard hissed in outrage, heat boiling from its open mouth. It aimed its open mouth toward the three of us and released a jet of superheated air, distorting our view. I was ready to intervene, but Javier was quick to throw up a magical shield. The shield vibrated as the air slammed against it, but there was no real weight behind the attack. The shield didn't stop all the heat of the attack from washing over us, but along with his mitigation spell, it reduced the damage from skin melting hot to second-degree burn hot. Both of the teens screamed and flinched back as they were burned. It was more surprise than damage though. My elemental defense reduced the damage to a minor burn. It would heal within minutes on its own. The boss was slow to approach as Maria's spell had done a number on its hind leg. This gave Javier time to heal both of their wounds and for Maria to cast her chaotic orb spell. At least that's what I like to call it. The temperature of the room skyrocketed as the beast let out an ear-piercing scream. Even I was forced to cover my ears. After the scream, its body started to glow as it charged us in an uneven loping gait. I decided to step in as my employees were still reeling from the scream. I cast Frost Wave followed by Disruption. The beast reeled as the cold slammed into it, but that only slowed it. Disruption tossed it to the side. It lay there bleeding as it tried to right itself, but its spikes were more detrimental than helpful in this instance. I healed Javier and Maria and they were able to pound the creature's remaining health down. Both leveled up from the level 14 creature, bringing Maria to 10 and Javier to 9. I congratulated them for surviving their first dungeon crawl and we left to get some much needed food and rest. The rest of the week was a repeat of the first day, and by the end, I could tell the two were getting sick of fighting the same creatures over and over. It wasn't much of a challenge after the second day. They knew the traps and all the weaknesses of the creatures, including the boss. Still, it wasn't all in vain. Both had made it to level 11 by that point. It would take another few weeks to get them to 15 if I kept using this dungeon. We would have to change it up, but that could come after. Right now they were preparing for a flight without me. They would back each other up on controls and recharging, and I had hired 6 of the marshal's men for this trip. The marshal was happy to help, considering it gave his men a bird's-eye view of the area and showed them what they could expect when visiting the local villages if they came under the mutual defense pact that Martin had been working on. It was going much smoother since I launched my merchant service. Speaking of merchants, the barge was nearly full of merchants this time around. I needed to lay down some ground rules before the kids left. I let out a sharp whistle, getting everyone's attention. All right, now that I have all of your attention, a few rules. Some of you were on the first voyage and enjoyed the ability to trade without leaving the barge. That changes this time. We have too many merchants and not enough space for customers. So that means everyone will set up on the ground. There were some grumbles of disappointment, but I continued on. That brings me to rule 2. I waved toward Javier and Maria. These are the captains for this journey. For the sake of simplicity, their word is law, my law. If they feel you are causing issues and order you to depart, you will depart or you will never be allowed to trade through my service again. Are we clear? There were nods of assent. Good. And last, there are 6 guards. They are here to protect you and the barge, not your inventory. If there is trouble and they order you back aboard, you best run. Now, I don't expect much trouble from the villages, but you never know. We will do our best to keep everyone safe. If you have a complaint, please come see me after the journey is complete. I wish you all good fortune on this trip. Javier, Maria, if you would, please lift off. The barge rose into the air. I walked over to the 2 captains and shook their hands. You two got this, don't worry. Thank you for everything, Mr. Paul, Maria replied, and Javier nodded. I waved them goodbye as I stepped off the barge and spread my wings. As soon as I left, the shield snapped into place and the barge turned toward its first destination. Chapter 140, Reap What You Sow. I stood at the top of the fortress, watching the barge until it was out of sight. It would be safe to say I was a bit nervous. Releasing such a large magical vessel into the hands of 2 kids that I had only known for a few weeks was a risk, but I trusted the 6 trained men on board to deal with any issues. I sighed as the barge faded into the distance. I was alone and bored. Martin was busy with his politics, Fiona had Martin, and Ska was still out and about with a group of the marshal's men. That left me with the fortress and my work on the second barge. It would be idyllic if I didn't know there were still enemies out there I hadn't dealt with. Since that one detection, while we were hunting the Black Dragon, there had been no sign of the Stygian Order. If they were a group like the Black Dragon, that would have made me feel comfortable, but they weren't. Their absence made me nervous and I wondered what bullshit they were up to now. King Formus inspected the massive underground caverns that had been erected in the last few weeks. It had quickly become clear that the human city did indeed have his stolen mana cannons. He clenched his fist as a wave of rage passed through his body. They would pay for their arrogance and insult. The plan was almost ready and the last of the explosives were being placed on the pillars that supported the cavern roof. Dwarves were donning armor and making sure their weapons were ready. The mages and healers were also readying as they slung belts of easy-to-reach mana potions across their barrel chests. His clan was no stranger to armed conflict. In his 80 years, he had fought in countless wars against other dwarves, orcs, goblins, elves, and humans. While his forces had been reduced to a mere 200, they were the survivors. Each one knew what to do without being told. He stomped toward 2 waiting dwarves. "Report," he ordered. "The last charges will be ready within the hour, my liege." "Good. Get my squire, it's time for me to prepare." At once, the dwarves bowed and ran off. Unlike leaders of the other races, dwarven royalty shared the front line with their subjects. A squire ran up and started attaching Formus's full plate armor. The metal glowed a subtle teal color as the enchantments flared to life. Formus moved and shifted, having the squire adjust pieces that were too loose or too tight. When complete, he was a juggernaut of muscle and metal. He reached out and took the spear from the waiting squire. It was shorter than human spears, but it gave him significantly more reach and reminded him of his days before taking on the role of a king. Formus had been a lowly spearman until he established his own clan. Through hard work and dedication, he had advanced his class to Berserk Lancer. His other class was king, but the level of that class was reliant on subjects and he had dropped down to level 2 thanks to this human's meddling. He would reclaim that honor today by ridding the world of him, his friends, and his allies in the city to the north. "Seal up the tunnels," he roared. Tunnels across the cavern started sealing over with rock. It would keep the dwarves inside safe from the blast. The king moved toward his position and the wall sealed closed behind him as the mages worked to block it off. I had an amazing night's sleep. After the previous day's boredom, I decided to sketch out a new armor design for myself. My armor was good, but it was becoming inadequate for the dangers I was going up against. The mana shield was easily destroyed by one good attack or even bypassed by people with tier 2 stats. And while the plates did a decent job of protecting me, the gaps between them were enough to slip a sword inside with enough force. Unfortunately, I wasn't an armorsmith. I could probably do a decent job with my current skills and with time become a decent armorer, but I had so many other things going on that I couldn't dedicate that time at this moment. I decided I was going to take my sketch to the bazaar and locate an armorer to craft it for me. I needed to go there anyway to get some gear for Javier and Maria. It meant selling some more runic gear since I was broke, so I spent the remainder of the night creating 4 items to sell. I locked up the fortress and made my way down the ramp. Bella was napping in the shade below the fortress in her usual spot. I had left her out to roam since she had been cooped up too much recently. I had just stepped off the ramp when I heard a strange whump noise. I didn't have time to contemplate where it could have come from, as the entire parking lot, half the abandoned store, and the buildings across the street rose into the air like someone had inflated a balloon before it all came crashing back down and into a huge pit, with me along for the ride. I was so surprised that I wasn't able to react. I slammed into the rubble at the bottom of the new pit that had once been the parking lot. My defensive necklace shattered and I grunted in pain as the damage was spread across my body. Even so, I coughed up blood. My head was dizzy as I struggled to stand in the loose debris. I heard noises and looked around, my vision swimming as I turned too quickly. Holes were opening up along the walls of the massive pit I now found myself in. Out of these holes stormed angry, armed, and armored dwarves, and they were all heading straight toward me. It didn't take a genius to figure out what they wanted, and I used Healing Touch and summoned my armor and weapon as spells began to rain toward me. I glanced over and saw the fortress had fallen as well, but was lying on its side where it had rolled, blocking the doorway. The bloodstain underneath told me of Bella's ultimate fate. "You motherfu!" A magical arrow slammed into my armor shield, interrupting my angry shout and causing the shield on my armor to flicker. I traced the path it had taken and watched a dwarf reloading an enormous crossbow. I had no more time to spare for him though, as 3 of the quicker dwarves were already upon me. I slipped in the loose footing, almost losing my balance and my head, but my high agility saved me as the blade whipped past my head. I used the stumble to roll back and cast Banshee's Wail on the 3 of them. All but one collapsed into the pile of rubble. The last one leaped toward me, stabbing out with 2 wicked-looking daggers. Despite his combat prowess, I batted them aside and smashed my metal hand into his face with a sickening crunch. He collapsed to the ground, either dead or dying. I yelled in rage, activating Victorious Shout, further reducing the damage I would take. My title for the horde would increase my damage reduction further. An explosion threw me off the small pile I had been standing atop and I crashed to the ground. "Get the defiler!" I heard a voice roar from somewhere in the pit. A hand of rock attempted to crush me, but I was able to avoid most of the attack as I tumbled away and got back to my feet. My armor was smoking slightly from the first attack. I winced as I felt at least one broken rib from the stone hand attack. These dwarves weren't fucking around, and neither was I. I had pulled out Consuming Void as my weapon of choice, probably due to my familiarity with the design. Fire and lightning began to crackle across the staff as I imbued it. This wasn't time to hold back or worry about consequences. I could deal with those if I survived. I activated Aura of Rage for the first time in months and the power in my body swelled. I located the closest attacker and stepped forward, my speed looking more like a blur of color as I activated Blink Step. There was a fountain of blood from every opening of the dwarf's armor as my staff smashed down on his helmet. I paid it no heed as I slammed into the next attacker, screaming in anger as I went. Magic and ranged attacks were slamming into me now as the dwarves adjusted to my tactics and speed. The shield built into my armor was already depleted and I was forced to heal through the damage as I raced around, killing the bastards as quickly as I could. There was a whump and I was tossed through the air. The pain had been excruciating, but it had been blessedly short. Whatever attack hit me had blown my leg clean off. I was able to stop myself from crashing into the wall at high speed by deploying my wings. It wasn't enough to save me completely though as I landed with a crash. I threw out a quick frost wave and arcane bolt from my prone position as a dwarf tried to take advantage of my injury. The dwarf was frozen solid with a hole where its heart should be. I tried to stand, but my healing was only able to cover over the wound at the moment. Regrowing the limb would take a few days. At least it wasn't a fate-based attack like my hand had suffered. The explosion had thrown me to the side of the pit with few dwarves and it gave me time to assess the situation. I saw at least 10 more dwarves running toward me. One was kitted in full plate that glowed with magic and carried a spear that sizzled ominously. If I had to guess, that was where the attack that had cost my leg came from. I used Identify on the dwarf. King Formus Berserk Lancer / King level 22 halves. This guy was no lightweight, and looking at the others, neither were they. Everyone was level 17 or above. I dodged away from a silvery ball that flew from one of the mages. When it impacted the wall behind me, a section of the wall turned to dust. I started casting Sunder skill on all the mages and the king. The pain of having a skill ripped away only seemed to anger them more. I threw out another arcane bolt before slamming a mana injector into my remaining leg. I couldn't speed up the regrowth of my leg, so I cast my wings again and leaped out of the hole, landing on a section of unbroken road and stumbling to stay upright. I could hear a primal scream of rage, but I had more pressing concerns as the pain in my body was reaching its limit. I turned off Aura of Rage and felt myself go limp. My body held up to the increased demand, barely, and I felt like I had exercised until my muscles turned to jello. Had all the dwarves been close enough to add points to my stats, I don't think my body would have lasted under the strain. I shook off the fatigue as much as possible. I needed to find help. I looked toward the city and saw a cloud of smoke rising into the air. Damn it, they hit the city at the same time, I cursed internally. These had to be the remaining dwarves from the mountain. But how did they learn about me? We had left no clues behind, even going so far as taking any documents we found. It was a mystery I would have to solve later. I heard the dwarves shouting below and it was getting closer. I used my staff as a cane as I hobble-jumped down the street toward the marshal's building. It was 2 blocks away. If someone was still there, I could get some help. I made it to the end of the block before a bolt of energy struck the building to my left, blowing out a chunk of brick that pelted against my armor. I risked a look back and saw 4 dwarves had already cleared the pit and were running down the street after me. 2 were mages and 1 was the king. I tried using Sunder skill on them again and was rewarded with 4 new abilities. The system decided it was a new fight and I laughed. I also began to activate Orb of Darkness before I stumbled around the corner of the building. I had learned a neat trick with the orb. I could leave it hovering and order it to attack any time after I activated it. So I left it floating just around the corner as I rushed away as fast as I could. I used the last cast of my wings to propel myself as far down the block as possible before the dwarves rounded the corner. The king had spotted my attack and threw himself wide, but the orb slammed into one of the hapless mages. The mage was hit with Curse of Sloth and was left behind as the other 3 raced toward me. I wasn't going to get away on one leg, so I started powering my mana cannon. As I did that, I threw out another arcane bolt, managing to score on the nameless warrior that was with the king and the mages. The bolt sent him flying back into the building. But I saw a white glow and cursed. It wasn't a warrior but a damn healer of some sort. I jammed 2 more mana injectors into my side along with a healing one as I got ready to fight. I waited until they got within 30 feet before I aimed my hand and fired. The blast spun me to the ground, but I heard a scream. I didn't wait to find out what I hit as I activated Blink Step and Charge. I pulled all of my weight into my good leg and shot down the rest of the block. The movement was jerky at best and I had to use the building to keep upright, but somehow I managed not to fall. As I reached the end of the block, I could see the coffee shop in the distance. I tried to scream for help, but something hard slammed into my back, propelling me forward and into the street. I tried to gulp down air as whatever hit me had punctured a lung, but all I got was foamy blood leaking from my lips. The wound was closing quickly as I had constant healing going, but it still left me mostly vulnerable in the street. No more running away, you fucking coward. This is for my fellow clansmen. I activated Area of Denial just before a spear impacted me. Instead of piercing my body, it was deflected by the shield, pushing me slightly into the ground and cracking the shield from the impact. I heard the king growl in annoyance as he ran over to grab the thrown spear. It put him in position for my mana cannon and I fired. I heard a grunt as the reduced power blast sent him tumbling away. My king. Vorts, go heal him, I will deal with this trash. I watched the healer run over to the downed king while the single remaining mage slowly walked toward me. At first, I thought it was because he was trying to be ominous, but I realized it was because he was still suffering the effects of the orb. As he got closer, I heard a crackling noise and managed to turn my head enough to see him. He was holding a dark red ball of crackling energy that continued to grow. Don't worry, human, I'm not going to waste this spell on your shield. I'm going to wait until it ends, then I'm going to use it, not that you will know because you will die instantly. Fuck you, I managed to cough out. I realized I could speak again and I cast Disruption. The spell activated, but the dwarven mage seemed to be surrounded by a spell that stilled the earth around him. He glared contemptuously at me as my spell failed to do anything to him. He was too far away for me to reach, so I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I used Earth Fist to shove myself toward the mage. He seemed slightly startled by my action. But my shield popped just as I latched my hand around his leg and activated Corrupting Touch. Unlike the warriors, the mage was only wearing robes. He screamed in pain and tried to launch his spell, but I activated the second cast of Area of Denial, draining away my mana and flinging the dwarf away from me. I was writhing in pain as a part of his spell had still hit me before the barrier flung it away. It felt like all my muscles were trying to extend and compress at the same time, and I felt ligaments tear from the abuse. This was the damage I received with the 90% reduction of magic from my armor and the little bit I got from my title since Victorious Shout had run out. Everything was a haze of pain as my health dipped to 20%. The mage was on the ground screaming as his lower half rotted away. The healer was too busy saving their king to come to his aid. I did see him down some health potions, but that only topped off his health, it didn't stop the cancerous spread of the spell. The mage eventually succumbed to his wound as it ate through his lower organs. I could only look on in satisfaction as my body tried to fight against his spell. My jaw was clamped shut so hard I felt my teeth crack. Whatever spell he had used must have been amplified because it went on for what felt like an eternity. When the pain finally subsided, my second shield only had 10 seconds remaining. I mumbled out my healing spells as I weakly injected a mana potion straight into my hand. I was too weak to reach anywhere else. Strength and mana flooded my body, but I wasn't sure it was going to be enough as I saw the king start to get to his feet. There was a clean hole through his magical armor and I couldn't help grinning as I saw it no longer glowed. I started feeding mana into the mana cannon, readying it for another shot. The king turned my way and roared, the spell tearing up the ground in front of him like someone had set off a directed explosion. I was tossed through the air and the wall of a building by the attack. My shield held though. I was getting pretty tired of being tossed around. I aimed for the hole I had come through, waiting for the king's next attack, but the man surprised me as he smashed through another section like a cannonball and ran straight at me. I redirected my aim and fired. The attack mostly missed the king as he used some skill to try and avoid the blast. I did clip him in the leg though as his mad charge missed me by a few feet. He crashed through the back wall of the building. I used the short time I had to try and stand again. I kept an eye out for the healer, but there was no sign of him. I did hear the sounds of a scuffle outside. It seems like our fight had not gone unnoticed. I turned back to the hole the king had gone through and pulled out my other staff. My first one was out on the street somewhere. I imbued it with wind and earth, lending the staff more speed and weight. I was prepared when the king charged through another section of the wall. I whipped the lion head around, connecting solidly with the side of the squat dwarven king. I wasn't able to put all my strength into the attack due to my missing leg, but the staff imparted enough force to propel the bastard back through the wall for a second time. The building groaned ominously and I hobbled out through one of the holes moments before the building collapsed, sending dust and debris everywhere. I coughed as the dust rolled over me. The street was obscured by the haze of dust so thick it blocked out everything, so I activated my tattoo and scanned the area. It was just in time as I spotted the king rushing in again, this time with his spear leading the charge. Our weapons connected and the shockwave knocked away the dust from our immediate vicinity. I stumbled back from the impact. The king was strong, easily second-tier strength, and he was boosted by at least one skill as my hands went numb from the impact. He was more skilled as well, his spear striking in with lightning-fast jabs. I was only able to keep up with my higher agility and utilizing time shudder to great effect. He started to push me back and I was losing ground due to my leg, his was only wounded and mine was still regrowing. I knew if I tripped I was dead. My mind whirled for a way to win and I struck on a dangerous but possible idea. To make it work though, I was going to have to take a hit. I left the king an opening and he didn't hesitate to strike out, stabbing me in the shoulder. I gritted my teeth against the pain and twisted, locking the spear in long enough to grab it and activate Cannibalize. The spear fell apart and entered my storage ring as the surprised king stumbled forward. I grabbed him by the faceplate in my metal hand and squeezed down with all the strength I could bear, activating godly might. The king didn't go quietly as he slammed meaty fists into my sides and head. I was able to avoid most of the blows with time shudder. The rest left me gasping for air or broke ribs. I healed through his assault as he tried to toss me around and even crush me under his weight. I never let go of the helmet though, and eventually, I felt all of the strength leave his body as his head finally caved in under the pressure of his helmet. I laid there, trapped under the corpse of the king for a couple of minutes before I heard someone run over. "He's over here," the voice shouted. It didn't sound like an angry shout, more one of relief. Out from the drifting dust came the marshal and a few of his men. "Oh God, are you okay, Paul?" "I'll survive," I choked out. "Can you get this fat fucker off of me?" It took 3 men to lift the dwarf off of me and I was finally able to suck down a lungful of air. They helped me to my feet. "The city." I coughed out. "There are many dead, but Martin and Fiona were able to stem the destruction and hold until more guards arrived." "What happened with you?" "They blew up the parking lot, dropping it into a crater. Then they swarmed me." "You two, go make sure there aren't any more around." The 2 men nodded and left. The marshal turned toward me. "Is this in retaliation for what you did to the dwarves in the mountain?" I winced. "Martin told you about that?" "He did, but only because I pressed him on where you got the cannons." I think he wanted to get it off his chest. I'm not one to cast blame and I understand why you did what you did, but why did they attack the town? I'm not sure, revenge perhaps. I'm more curious as to how he found out about me or the cannons. We searched the king and located a manila envelope containing detailed information on what we had done to the dwarven facility. How the hell did they get all this information? The marshal asked, startled. I had an idea and it didn't mean anything good.